records are being kept of persons stopped. There are no police records of persons stopped. I think that's very, very important. Everybody should understand it. You describe it as a stop and search. It really isn't. It's a stop and question. The position of the black community is, let's forget about whether it's constitutional or not. While this might be all right in the white community where you don't have historical tensions, but because of the psychology of the black-white relationships and the tensions which have evolved, that it would be more hurtful than helpful. This procedure is not being used to collect traffic warrants. The very first day there were some situations developed in which that was done, and we put a stop to that immediately.
I think the mayor is making a terrible mistake in going along with his police on this one. I think the mayor will come to regret this. I think the mayor, in the last several days, has lost a lot of ground. He has people all over the nation wondering why he is following this ill-conceived advice.
Regrettably, we didn't make any arrests. We made numerous stops of possible suspects. We found the people to be most cooperative. The black community realizes the seriousness of the situation and the need for cooperating with the police authorities, and they have done so. We've received no complaints about unnecessary stops.
The calls that we have received and the responses that we've received since yesterday indicate to us that there are people who are not only being stopped once, but twice, as many as 3 and 4 times. And a lot of black people are incensed and very angry and put out and upset about this kind of police state that exists in the black community. The condition of the police state creates a greater possibility of what I would view as a racial war. It's very, very possible that that people will become so angered and frustrated that we will see taking place in San Francisco a condition that we've never had to happen before, that relates to whites and blacks at war with each other.
I don't think I like it. I don't think no one has the right to stop me just because I'm me or just because I'm black.
I think it's an affront against the black community in San Francisco, and I think it is also being used by politicians to further outside aims.
Nobody that I know of, and I was born and raised in this city, ever raised any question about the Zodiac, and it seems very much on a racial slur.
When in fact the Zodiac killer and his picture came out in the papers as well as television, a print of what they thought the Zodiac killer to look like, they did not in fact begin to create a dragnet and a police state as it relates to white participants. So it's inherently discriminatory.
But I have been informed that he may have hinted or alluded to that this may be racially inspired, this street check looking for suspects. I want to repeat now, I don't know this for a fact, but it was hinted at pretty strongly that he did that, and that it was strictly harassment of black people. Well, nothing is further from the truth.
I think that just a blanket description is not enough to stop every member of the community at random. I think they should have a more specialized approach, and they should not be as intimidating as they have proved to have been in the past, because it's going to provide friction with the community and the authorities.
It's unfair because of the fact that we are already oppressed, you know, by the Gestapo-type taxes that the police perpetuates against the blacks anyway. And this is just another form of expanding that perpetuation, you know, of the violent oppression that we go through every day.
I was stopped last night behind this apparent attitude that has been laid down behind the recent killings. And I'll state emphatically that if this is Mayor Alioto's attitude, and I feel that me and a few others who are in the community and have done a lot of work in the community, he need not come to the community for his votes.
Police deny it is a desperation move, but with all other efforts having turned up little or nothing in the zebra manhunt other than controversy over stopping young black men, a special squad of 30 mostly black officers assembled at headquarters this afternoon to try a new approach.
Well, primarily we're going to be an intelligence gathering unit. We're going to go into the different neighborhoods, and we're going to try and contact people that may have some information who, because feeling it's not important enough, don't feel like calling the police. Feeling that black officers probably would be more resentful and be more in tune to the attitudes of the people that we're dealing with. That's why the unit was made up predominantly of black officers. Now, I believe this is the first time this has ever been attempted in the San Francisco Police Department anyway.
Does that mean that the stop and search or stop and question tactics have turned up nothing? Is this a desperation move now?
Well, we don't see it as a desperation move. We just think that it's something that may supplement the efforts and may, in a way, ease the pressure that's being brought on the community.
Attention all units, released to the owner. California license 795, boy, King Henry, scratching the hot sheet, California license in the 7.
This is how the new Zebra Black detail will work. Officers Willie Johnson and Herman Clark, for example, drove to the heart of the Fillmore district where many of the Zebra shootings have taken place. Over a period of time, they hope to establish reliable contacts who will in turn keep an eye peeled for the Zebra.
We're checking for suspicious men who have been reported to us. We're trying to track down men who have been reported to us, find out their activities the last several nights, especially the nights of the murders. We're also interviewing several people and trying to find out if there are witnesses to the past homicides that we've had and shootings. Anything we can do to bring an end to the zebra killings. That's about the gist of it. We're going to be in the area, not only this district, but all districts of the city.
And you told the man in the bar that there had been a report of somebody fitting this description had come into the bar today with a gun?
We got an anonymous call that there possibly a man of that description had come into the bar. We just went to check it out.
Mm-hmm. And nothing came of it?
Nothing came of it. We're getting reports like this all the time.
Police make it clear that this new special effort by black policemen is not a substitute for the controversial stop and question tactic of Operation Zebra. In fact, police brass will be hauled into federal court tomorrow to try to justify it. Mike Lee, Eyewitness News in the Fillmore of San Francisco.
Am I wrong? Cause I wanna get it on till I die. Am I wrong? Cause I wanna get it on till I die. Get it on till I die. Get it on till I die. Y'all remember me? Y'all remember me?
Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy, our 5th installment on racist suspect Bennett Cohen's The Zebra Murders. So we are picking up the chapter Operation Zebra. We're like halfway, a little bit beyond halfway through the chapter Operation Zebra. That's what we'll start at for this week. The audio segments that we heard at the beginning, I guess even before I do the audio segment specifically, today's date, Thursday, April 22nd, 2024. So I have been told that is the Sparkle Gus T. So that is James Brown's payback featuring Tupac Shakur. Now, that's the James Brown edition that was specifically remixed for the soundtrack to Django Unchained, which I thought was somewhat related to this subject matter, somehow, maybe. If you saw the film, reading more important than watching television, but I thought it would be a great way to include the one and only Tupac Shakur, also a Bay Area legend. Then I had to play Payback one more time because I said last week when I played this James Brown track that this song came out in 1974, the original version. I did not know that this song came out specifically in April of 1974. So right in the thick of all of this, that's when Payback, like, ooh-wee. That's the sort of thing where if the godfather of R&B, hardest working man in show business, if he had gone to the Bay Area to do the live version of Payback, like, ooh, they might have had to say at this time, ooh, it's a little hot, JB. Maybe we do something else. We switch it up. It's a man. We do a longer version of It's a Man's World. How about that? We have to save Payback for once we get outside of California, because they might think you with these rowdy gorillas and Negro Panthers and zebras and it's right hot in the Bay. Like, we can't do that one. Or you got to give a disclaimer like, ooh-wee, I am not. White brothers, white sisters, I am not with them niggers over there. I'm not with them. I didn't talk to them. I don't have none of them. The niggers, the Panthers, the gorillas, the zebras, none of them. None of them. None of them. You see my wife? We miss you, James. We miss you, James. Anyway, audio segment number 1, session number 5, the clips that we heard at the very beginning before we got to James, we heard Mayor Alioto and other enforcement officials, all white at first, talking about the importance of doing these searches. They are not racist. They're not stop and search and frisk and all that. We question. We investigate. That's what they said. We're not stopping and assaulting and smacking people around like Lynn Swann. That was first. Then we heard from a number of black citizens who are residents in the Bay Area. Particularly, we heard Reverend Cecil Williams. Whew, man, I have seen so many pictures of this black dude, mostly with Jim Jones. It was wild. Like, whoa, that is Reverend Cecil Williams. He is not standing next to Jim Jones, and he's not even talking about the People's Temple. He's talking about the zebra killings and how he thinks this is racist. And in fact, you even heard, it was a bunch of different black people, but you heard Reverend Cecil Williams specifically say, hey, they had the announcements for the Zodiac Killer, which was at the exact same time, same part of California, white killer who they never caught, still unsolved to this day, and this was a white suspect. You didn't do all this. When it was a white killer running around killing other white people, you didn't go and stop and smack around all of the white people in the area, white men. What are you up to? What are you doing? You got any suspicious habits? Where were your whereabouts this past? You didn't do all that. Now you got these zebra, and you hear that with the announcer said the cops, they're going to be on the lookout for the zebra. Is it an actual zebra sprinting around San Francisco? Are you looking for a zebra? Or are you looking, that's why I said zebras, panthers, in the newspaper at the same time, often on the same page. They have a group called the Black Guerrilla Front. Panthers, guerrillas, and the Symbionese Liberation Army, that's a serpent as their logo, and that is also attributed to black people. So it's every type of wild jungle beastly critter you can imagine. They just stick that in association with black people in the Bay Area. Zebras, panthers, gorillas, serpents, niggers, alligators, apes, coons, possums, and we'll throw in whatever else we can think of. And oh man, It is on and cracking. Now, you heard black officers with the San Francisco Police Department at the very end. They mentioned Willie Johnson, Herman Clark. Both of those two black males are mentioned in the book. In fact, Willie Johnson, that is the person that they said reminded them of Sonny Liston. No one that I saw in this segment reminded me of Sonny Liston, a former heavyweight champion, privileged black male. But anyway, they were mentioned in the text and talking about their efforts to go around. Man, with the music, because they were in the Fillmore, formerly where the black people resided, racial dislocation, long wiped out. But they had the black males there. It didn't remind me of Sonny Liston, but I'm going to tell you, it reminded me of Shaft. Ernest Tidyman's creation, White Man. That's what it reminded me of. And in fact, if they had Isaac Hayes playing, oh my God, it had such a, that's the same time period. That's right when Shaft was published, and they had the, man. And we're going to use the black cops to go in the black area and do more stop and search and the identification. Man, can I please get one of the zebra identification cards? eBay, anything, can we get one? They said some people got stopped 2 or 3 times, so it might have been some people got 3 or 4 zebra identification cards, you know, throughout this time period. So if we can find what one of these looks like, is it a zebra on the zebra identification card? Man, wonders never cease. Bay Area and California history. All of that audio is has video, obviously, courtesy of KPIX in California. We will get to it. Katherine, Massey Book Club, The Zebra Murders, Bennett Cohen, Racist Suspect, audio segment 1.
I'm mad. I want revenge. I want revenge. My patient revenge. On revenge. My patient revenge. On revenge. I want revenge. I want revenge. Can I get some hits? I need those hits. I need those hits. Hit back.
The fear experienced by the citizens of San Francisco was not just an abstract thing for Sanders. It was as physically and emotionally real to him as were his wife and his children. When fear grips a city, it does the same thing to cops and their families as it does to everyone else. It's just that the cops can't show it when they're on the street. But sometimes that makes it even worse. I was living and breathing those killings. I'd seen the bodies, I'd smelled the blood, and I'd heard the sobs of the victims' families. One of the homicides that Gil and I handled, the 19-year-old Moynihan, was holding a teddy bear that he got for his baby sister when he died. His parents were good people, and they were devastated. Why shouldn't they be? What had their son ever done? His murder wasn't just a crime, it was something so vile that it's hard to see how it could ever be atoned. But my job wasn't just to think of the victims. I had to catch the killers. And to do that, I had to figure out why they killed. From what I could see, the one thing that seemed to guide every other possible motive, whether it was to start up a race war or just avenge what they saw as injustice, was rage. A crazy, insane rage over what they thought whites had done to blacks. Once you got to that realization, if you were black, you had to pause. Because the truth was, there wasn't a black I knew who didn't feel at least an inkling of the same thing. I don't mean the kind of rage that makes you want to murder. That's madness. I'm talking about the kind of anger that makes you want to change the world underneath your feet, that makes you want to do away with hate, not add to it. That's a righteous kind of anger, the sort that any black who had to grow up around racism has every right to embrace. But they had taken that righteous anger and twisted it into something evil. And that made me hate the killers almost as much as the killing did, because I felt violated too. They had stolen my own righteous anger and turned it into something sick. I used to wonder sometimes what would have happened if someone tried to tar me with what those killers were doing. That was a fear a lot of blacks felt, of getting lumped in the same boat with the killers, looked on by whites like we might be capable of that too. As close as I was to the case, and as hard as I was working at trying to catch those killers, I kept wondering how I'd react if I'd had something like that thrown at me, what kind of rage I'd feel, and what I would do The anxiety afflicting the city was ratcheted up a notch when, for the first time in San Francisco's history, the police issued a warning to all residents to stay off the street at night, or, if they had to go out, to travel only in 2s and 3s. One incident that captures just how crazy things became occurred 2 nights after the assaults of the 28th. As Sanders recalls, "A white woman was grabbed by a black guy and dragged into a Cadillac. The guy told her not to worry because he wasn't one of those zebra killers. Then he raped her. It was sad, but it was also surreal. When rapists reassure women by saying they're not mass murderers, you know things are out of control." As if the atmosphere in the city wasn't tense enough, the Chronicle received a creepy letter that was alleged to be from the Zodiac Killer, the first from him in over 3 years. Bill Armstrong, who along with Dave Toschi was the lead investigator on Zodiac, believed it to be genuine. In Armstrong's opinion, Zodiac was even more interested in publicity than in killing, and the letter was his attempt to steal Zebra's thunder. Apparently, one infamous serial killer had become jealous of the attention being paid to others, and in an insane mass murder competition was trying to wrest the media's spotlight back in his direction. Then, another letter to a news organization, this time KGO-TV, the ABC affiliate in San Francisco, seemed to take credit for the shootings. This one purported to be from the Symbionese Liberation Army, the same group that had claimed responsibility for slaying Marcus Foster. Postmarked on January 30th, 2 days after the attacks, it predicted, "Any day now there will be more killing and more shooting," and went on to call for the release of Joseph Ramiro and Russell Little, the men charged with Foster's murder. Nothing in the letter indicated any knowledge of the shootings beyond what one could have read in the newspaper, so in the minds of most investigators there was little reason to think it was anything other than a hoax, or an attempt by the SLA to add to their notoriety. Even so, the seeds were sown in the minds of some that a connection might exist. Although the SLA was unknown before the murder of Marcus Foster, since then they had been using letters and communiques filled with incendiary rhetoric to gain increased media exposure, joining the legion of other shadowy, secretive groups in the Bay Area like the Weathermen and the Black Liberation Army. Like the latter group, the SLA was believed to be an alliance of black and white radicals. Most in homicide did not take the letters seriously, but others, especially in the SFPD brass, felt it was worthy of serious consideration. The inspectors in homicide, meanwhile, followed their own lines of inquiry. There were numerous witnesses to the January 28 shootings, and the detectives patiently questioned all of them, trying to elicit descriptions of the killers, or obtain an ID by showing arrays of photographs of various possible suspects. Nevertheless, they were hindered in the investigation by the very randomness of the crimes. Little in the way of physical evidence ever surfaced, and even as they were dragging out the photographs, everyone knew that the perpetrators were almost certainly not among their lists of usual suspects. These were not just any homicides, nor were they just a string of serial murders. This was a kind of killing for which there was little precedent in American policing, at least since the early part of the century. As Richard Haig stated so eloquently in the Chronicle, this was terrorism, a variety of crime with a uniquely senseless logic to it, and a new way of investigating had to be devised to deal with it. Recognizing the possible connection between the incident with Larry Crosby and the shootings of January 28th, Sanders, Guilford, Carreras, and Fontanos tried to figure out a way to pierce the veil of solidarity surrounding the Nation of Islam and determine whether or not its members might be involved. However, doing so was harder than one might think. Real cops are not movie cops. They cannot act without evidence, warrants, or some sort of probable cause. Complicating matters was the fact that the Nation of Islam is a religion, and as such protected by a battery of constitutional rights. The first line of the article of the Bill of Rights reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." Doing anything that is seen as contravening those words can bring a gale wind of legal wrath down on a police department. In this case, the constitutional barrier was reinforced by the insular nature of the Nation of Islam. With most radical groups like the Panthers, or prison gangs like the Black Guerrilla Family, cops can achieve some degree of access, especially black cops who have established a measure of trust in the community and can use it to get to informers. But not with the Nation of Islam. That organization was simply too tightly wound to be compromised in such a way. Part of the reason for this insularity was the nation's combination of politics and faith. Groups that are merely political can be discredited by their results or lack thereof. To the faithful, however, there is no way to debunk a religion. Their truth is their truth, and it is unassailable. Another part of the reason was the nation's internal division in the 1960s and 70s, and the revenge its leadership had taken against those who had quit. The Nation of Islam made a practice of shunning ex-members. More than that, the fate of many who had left and then dared to speak out against the nation in those days served to silence potential informants. Malcolm X was the best-known example of the kind of retribution that the nation could take back then against former members, who were considered apostates. But he was not the only one, and the legacy of violence within the nation had a chilling effect on many who might otherwise have spoken out against it. Yet the bloodshed of January 28th made the investigators in homicide determined to find some sort of avenue into the nation. Both Sanders and Guilford suspected that a few African-American officers in the SFPD might be members. Not surprisingly, those officers tried their best to keep their membership a secret and were unwilling to speak about it even with other black officers. There was no way they could be used as sources. The only avenue Sanders could think to turn to was a personal one, a friend of his named Ron Hilton. Sanders and Hilton had been close growing up. They had played football together in high school and hung out on the moor, as Fillmore was called by those who frequented it most. Then Hilton was drafted, went to Vietnam, and came back addicted to heroin. Sanders had tried hard to help him beat the drug, but was powerless to break his addiction. When Hilton joined the Nation of Islam, they were able to do for him what his friends could not, and Hilton got clean. The Nation of Islam is a different organization now than it was then, Sanders explains. It does wonderful things now, without the secrecy and negativity that often seemed present then. But what Ron went through made me see how positive a force it could be even then. I started to think that if I could talk to Ron, I might be able to convince him to help me to get to the bottom of whether or not a connection existed between some rogue element inside the nation and Zebra. Because if there was, it was a cancer, and it could destroy all the good the nation did. Less than a week after the night of January 28th, Earl Sanders began to seek out his old friend, determined to find some way to open a window into the Nation of Islam. However, before he or anyone else on the task force could make any progress in that direction, something happened that turned the investigation in the entire Bay Area on its head and stopped them all in their tracks. Patty Hearst was kidnapped by the SLA. Chapter 8. Patty. 1 year of Watergate is enough. Richard Nixon's message in his 1974 State of the Union address sounded like a plea that he might wake up from a bad dream, but a few days later, the House of Representatives responded by voting to broaden the powers of the Judiciary Committee's impeachment probe, allowing the committee to subpoena anyone of interest to the investigation, including the President. The vote was a resounding 410 to 4, demonstrating overwhelming support for the committee's work investigating Watergate. 1 year of Watergate, unfortunately for Nixon, would not be enough. He wasn't the only politician starting off 1974 on the wrong foot. Just a week or so before the tragedy of January 28th, Joseph Alioto, locked in a contentious primary battle against Jerry Brown for the Democratic nomination for governor, suddenly found his marriage in shambles and himself blindsided by the frightening meltdown of his wife Angelina. At 58, Angelina Alioto was still strikingly beautiful, elegant, and every bit as willful as her husband. They had always had a tempestuous relationship, but the friction between them combusted when Alioto failed to introduce Angelina, who was sitting by his side, to the adoring crowd at a campaign dinner in Palm Springs. Feeling jealous and ignored, Angelina absconded, running away from home without telling anyone where she was going or what she was doing. Traveling under the alias Angelina de Puma, which had been her grandmother's name, the mayor's wife rented a car and began a leisurely 18-day tour of the California missions, using her disappearance as a way to get back at her husband. It worked. Afraid that Angelina might have been kidnapped or even killed, Alioto mobilized the SFPD in an effort to find her, keeping the entire matter far from the public eye and never letting on about his worries to either the press or his opponents in the Democratic primary. Despite the search, Angelina stayed hidden until the SFPD finally went public, issuing an all-points bulletin just 6 days after the bloody night of January 28th. When Angelina heard a report about herself on a Santa Cruz radio station, she decided to come out of hiding and return to both the city and her husband. The next day, she and Alioto gave a bizarre and oddly embarrassing press conference. Here was the mayor of a city racked by trauma, trying to run what could be the most important political race of his career, airing his marital woes in public, with his wife telling the world that she felt neglected. When asked whether or not she had ever considered divorcing her husband, Angelina answered in a way that was meant to be ironic, but came out as startlingly inappropriate. Actually, it wasn't dissolution I was thinking of. It was murder. Given the wave of murders that had just swept across the city, it is understandable that the San Francisco Chronicle should describe Alioto as being unnaturally pale during the press conference. As bad as he must have felt, however, things were about to get worse. At 19, Patricia Hearst was a rather pampered college sophomore who could have had any advantage she wanted while attending the University of California at Berkeley. Yet, although she was the granddaughter of tycoon William Randolph Hearst, with a mother on the California Board of Regents and a father who was the chairman of one of the largest and most influential media conglomerates in the nation, Patty seemed unaffected by her status, moving across the bay to Berkeley's student ghetto, blending in with classmates and living with her fiancé, Stephen Weed, who once taught Patty math at an exclusive girls' school and was now a Ph.D. candidate in philosophy at Cal. Patty appeared to want a taste of the real Berkeley experience, and by all reports from friends and family she was enjoying an idyllic college life. Then, in one harrowing night, Patty Hearst's perfect college idyll ended. At about 9:15 p.m. on Monday, February 4th, 1 week after San Francisco had been terrorized by a night of bloodshed, a woman and 2 men knocked on the door of the apartment Patty shared with Stephen Weed, and then barged in once it was opened, beating, gagging, and blindfolding Weed, and dragging off Patty as what they called a prisoner of war. One of the male kidnappers was Donald DeFries, the SLA's African-American leader. The other was Bill Harris, a Caucasian. However, Weed, confused by his beating, reported that both men were black. With the SLA's letter to KGO-TV about Zebra still fresh in their minds, some at the police department made a link between the two events, turning the attention of Chief Scott as well as others in leadership and Mayor Alioto, who had ultimate authority, away from the Nation of Islam and toward the shadowy Symbionese Liberation Army. Many of the investigators who had been concentrating solely on Zebra were now forced to divide their focus.
Most of us in homicide never thought the SLA was involved in Zebra, Sanders recalls. The MO of Zebra was different from what the SLA did, but some of the brass got it in their heads that it might be connected, and a lot of our manpower went in that direction. You can't blame them. The daughter of one of the richest men in the city got kidnapped, and everybody from Alioto on down wanted to get her back, and get her back alive.
There was also a political dimension to the decision. As Sanders explains,
Zebra wasn't just any murder case. It was a case that had the kind of political implications that can define careers, both for the brass inside the department and politicians outside it. People wanted results, and if focusing on the shootings didn't get them, then some people started to think that maybe looking into the Hearst case would.
Nor was it only the SFPD that shifted attention to the kidnapping. Overnight, the saga of Patty and the SLA subsumed all the other radical stories in the media and overwhelmed the Zebra assaults. The press literally camped out on the front lawn of Randolph Hearst's palatial mansion as he began to negotiate in public with the SLA, answering the communiques they released with press conferences. Greetings to the people and fellow comrades and brothers and sisters, began one early statement by the SLA. It went on to claim that Patty had been arrested for crimes her mother and father had committed, cataloging a laundry list of corporations in which they played a role, and demanding an unrealistic array of good-faith gestures from the parents to secure Patty's well-being. Death to the fascist insect that preys upon the life of the people was the ending for this and most of the other SLA communiques. Yet no matter how outrageous their demands or insulting their invective, Randolph Hearst would always step up to the microphones that had become semi-permanent fixtures on his front lawn and deliver a measured response, trying to reason in the face of violence with the revolutionaries who held his daughter captive. This colloquy would dominate the newspapers and airways for nearly 2 full months, until in another headline-grabbing story, Patty declared that she had taken the nom de guerre of Tanya, and the resolution to the kidnapping that had seemed so near suddenly melted away. Meanwhile, the Zebra investigation continued to run into dead ends. Despite the string of new cases from the January 28th attacks and the eyewitness accounts of the shootings. Another development complicated matters. Although the gun used on January 28th was a .32, it was different from the one that had been used before. Mike Luksich, the weapons expert, initially couldn't determine whether the new shootings involved multiple guns or not, but eventually he was able to match the markings on all the casings and slugs collected from January 28th. Once again, a single gun was used. But the investigators were certain now that there was more than one assailant. As Sanders explains,
"The descriptions the witnesses gave us, both during the December shootings and on the night of January 28th, were varied enough that we knew there had to be more than one perpetrator. Even so, they made a habit of using one gun over and over. Professional killers use a gun once and then get rid of it, hoping it won't be traced. This crew was doing just the opposite. They wanted us to link the shootings. The bullets were like calling cards, a way of taking credit for each shooting. That was one more factor that made most of us on homicide certain a radical group was behind it all. And after that long night of bloodshed, we were more determined than ever to find out who it was."
Yet once again their efforts were stymied by a simple fact. The shooters, so tantalizingly close on January 28th, seemed to have gone underground, vanishing the way violent winds do, leaving little in the way of evidence apart from the devastation they had spawned. As in December, no one on the street knew anything about who they were or where they might have gone. It was time to reassess.
"When an investigation seems to hit a wall, you try to look at it from every angle possible."
Sanders frowns as he thinks back about how the investigation had stalled, as if the frustration still rankles.
"One thing you start to do is look at the timeline, especially with multiple or serial killings, when each assault took place, and what came before it. And from looking at the patterns, there always seemed to be some incident that preceded the attacks. The incident with Crosby was an obvious precursor to the shootings of the 28th, but as Gil and I looked it all over, there seemed to be others, too. It had come out in early December that the FBI had been trying to infiltrate the Nation of Islam as part of COINTELPRO. That was followed by the incident in the Federal Building, where an FBI agent shot a young kid from Hunters Point, George Session, in the back. Just a few days later, the December shootings began. Danzig, Agnos, DiGirolamo, Bertuccio, DiMartini, then Moynihan and Hostler. But when it became news and we covered the streets in search of the killers, the shooting stopped. For a while everything was quiet. Then came the Crosby shooting, which was followed by the 5 attacks in one night. Then the press went wild again, and the killers went silent. It was like they were playing a cat-and-mouse game with us, almost as if they were fighting guerrilla style, getting in licks then laying low when things got too hot. And then when the time came, striking again.
In the wake of the shootings of January 28th, Anthony Harris quit working at Black Self-Help Moving and Storage. Harris later claimed that he had been unnerved by the events of that night and felt his own life was in danger. Thomas Manny, the owner of Black Self-Help, disputed that, claiming he had fired Harris. Yet Harris may also have been unnerved by something else. The fact that his picture had been printed in the San Francisco Chronicle on the day of the shootings did not in itself link him to the assaults. It is easy to see, however, how someone who spent most of his life either in jail or trying to avoid it might feel vulnerable on seeing his image tied so directly to the rally in support of Larry Crosby, knowing, as Harris claimed he did, that the shooting of Crosby was the real motive behind the assaults in which he had been involved as an accomplice, at the very least. Regardless of the reason, Harris moved to Oakland with Deborah, the woman with whom he had been living, and cut himself off from Black Self-Help and the men who worked there. The one exception was Larry Green. With him, Harris still retained a sense of friendship and remained in at least intermittent contact. In the days that followed January 28th, the others from Black Self-Help went about their business with an air of normalcy. Green involved himself in his work with both the Temple and Black Self-Help, and also threw himself into his new marriage, devoting time to be with the son to whom he had become a stepfather. J.C. Simon and Manuel Moore made plans for a trip to Chicago at the end of February for the Savior's Day Festival, held each year at the Temple's headquarters to honor the nation's founder. This return to normalcy may have been attributable to survival instinct, given that swarms of police filled the streets in the weeks after the attacks. As Sanders points out, it might also have been a tactical choice.
You see the same pattern with a lot of terrorist groups. There'll be a surge in violence that creates a wave of fear in the public and makes the police step up their investigation. So the terrorists shut down for a while. Eventually they come back with another surge, and when they do, the wave of fear that follows grows exponentially, getting bigger than ever.
Meanwhile, the effort to establish some source within the nation went nowhere.
I did everything I could to get in touch with Ron Hilton, my old friend who had joined the nation,
Sanders recalls.
I heard he moved back east to New York, but every lead on how to get in touch with him washed out. It was like he'd disappeared.
Guilford tried to follow a similar avenue by reaching out to Dwight Stallings, whose family he knew well and who by coincidence worked at Black Self-Help. In high school, Guilford had been good friends with Stallings' older brothers, and the much younger Dwight had looked up to Guilford, following him around like a protege or mascot. As Sanders recounts,
Stallings had big ears like Guilford, who had ears so big as a kid that his mother took to calling him Jughead. Stallings became Little Jug. They were close when Stallings was a kid in the 50s. Even in the 60s they stayed in touch, with Stallings serving as a pretty good source for Gil. But in the late 60s, Stallings hooked up with radical groups, and when he got involved in the nation, he cut Gil off. It was part of the whole insular nature of the nation back then. If you weren't a believer, you couldn't be part of it. They created a walled-in world, and without the kind of solid evidence that would allow us to get warrants, there was no way we could tear the walls down.
As February progressed toward March, the Patty Hearst kidnapping continued to merit banner headlines in the local papers, while the Zebra case, with no new shootings, faded from view. With the SFPD brass putting so much emphasis on solving the kidnapping, Sanders and Guilford began to spend more of their time investigating it, tapping their sources in the black and radical communities in both San Francisco and in the East Bay to develop information about where she was, the names of the individuals who had taken her, and what links there might be between her abductors and other radical crimes.
A lot of the information we gathered had to do with safe houses, the loose network of places radicals stayed when they had to go underground. We checked out endless safe houses on the East Bay, in Berkeley and Oakland.
Their digging may not have uncovered Patty Hearst's whereabouts, but it did take them deep into a political netherworld where radical ideology and crime mixed in ways that made them seem inseparable. One such case involved the Black Guerrilla family, the organization that George Jackson had started in prison, which tended to function as much like a gang as it did a radical cadre.
Between Zebra and Patty, the whole Homicide Bureau was at a point where we were literally worked around the clock again, Sanders recalls. And one night, Gil and I got a case tossed at us about 1 a.m. A call came in about a white girl who got killed out in Bernal Heights, up above the Mission, first strangled and then shot in the face with a 9mm. Our first worry was it might be another Zebra killing, only this time using another gun. But when we did a little digging, we learned the victim was connected to the prison movement. What a lot of groups did, especially the ones based in the prisons, was use girls as couriers, mostly white girls in their 20s who could go pretty much anywhere without being stopped or looked on with suspicion. This girl had been suspected of being an informant by some of the movement guys she worked with, and they killed her. But no one that we talked to knew who her contacts were. Then, around dawn, one of our insurance policies told us she'd been hanging out with a guy named Lawrence Fields, who just got out of Quentin and was staying at a halfway house on 20th Street in Oakland. So we went to the East Bay, hooked up with an Oakland cop we knew, and headed over to where he was staying. As soon as we got there, we saw him. Lawrence was short, maybe 5'6", like a fire plug with legs, and he was right there in front, walking down the porch of the halfway house. Well, Lawrence took one look at us, reached in his waistband, and started running. We all took off after him. He kept looking back with his hand tucked in his pants. But when he got his gun out, he bumped into this woman he didn't see. The two of them went sprawling, and the gun skittered across the sidewalk. I leaped on top of Lawrence, got my own gun out, and told him if he moved, I'd blow his ugly head off. Then Gil picked up the gun. Sure enough, it was a 9mm, and the bullets matched the ones that killed the girl. That wasn't the end of it. The girl had a boyfriend who was a lifer in Quentin, and a major player in the Black Guerrilla family. But he loved that girl. When he heard what they did to her, strangling her and then shooting her in the face, he decided to roll on everybody. It's hard to get a source in prison to do something like that, because most times they get killed. But he was so angry, he didn't care. He just wanted to get the guys who hurt his girl. One tip in early March, about a month after Patty had been abducted, sounded like it might be the real deal and lead to a break in Zebra. And once again, it started with a woman. There was a character named C.O.W.S, who used to try to stir up stuff in the Fillmore. C.O.W.S was the name that Malcolm X took before he died, so it became popular among people in the nation and outside it. This guy was somewhere in between. He'd hung out in the fringes of Temple No. 26, but he was only on the edges of the scene there, spending as much or more time with other groups, like the Panthers and the BLA. In the language of the streets, he was the sort who could talk more shit than a Christmas turkey. You could only believe every other word he said, and that was probably being generous. But he was someone who always wanted to be a mover and shaker. Ambition like that drove a lot of the guys who hung out on the radical fringes back then. A decade earlier, some of them would probably just be crooks trying to get over. But one of the best ways to get juice in the 70s was to be a radical. The more extreme, the better. That was what C.O.W.S was trying to do in the Fillmore. But like a lot of wannabes, he'd promise one thing and then do another. And a woman who was tired of being lied to came to Gil and me and rolled on him. According to her, C.O.W.S and his crew had turned an old rooming house at the corner of Fillmore and Fulton into a fort, lining the walls with steel plates, even putting them over the windows and leaving little holes for high-powered rifles. She said they were going to go out at night and shoot at some cops, then lure them back to the rooming house for a shootout, figuring they could kill off a couple dozen from inside with the kind of weapons they had. What it sounded like was a ratcheting up of Zebra, taking random shootings and turning it into a full-fledged war. She said C.O.W.S even had an escape plan. He and his crew dug a hole from the floor of the rooming house all the way down to the sewers, so that after they were done picking off cops, they could just crawl out to safety. The problem was that the fools didn't know the sewers below Fillmore were only 36 inches wide, and they'd have to practically be midgets to get out that way. Sanders and Guilford began investigating the woman's claims, talking to their own informants, and quickly developed enough information for a warrant. With the help of Charlie Ellis and Charlie Barca, they arranged to have a special tactical squad put together. Then Sanders and Guilford prepared to infiltrate C.O.W.S's group themselves, literally opening the door so the tac squad could rush in. We stopped shaving for a day or two, tossed on some black leather jackets and floppy hats, and looked like some pretty bad dudes. The word was that the deal was supposed to go down on a Friday night. So early that evening, Gil and I set up the tac squad around the corner from the rooming house. Then he and I went up to the front door and knocked. After a minute, a guy came to the door and opened it a crack, and I told him that we were there about the business. He got a scared look on his face and opened the door some more, saying, "You gotta get out of here, man. The cops are going to be coming in." He didn't get any further than that. I put my hand over his mouth and grabbed him around the chest. Gil grabbed his legs, and we picked him up and ran off while the tac squad rushed inside, helmets on and shotguns ready. The guy was trying to warn us about the shootout with the cops, but what he didn't know was that we had 20 right around the corner, waiting to get in. When they entered the rooming house, Sanders and Guilford found it exactly as their informer had described, with steel plates lining the walls and windows. C.O.W.S and about a half-dozen others were there, along with a stockpile of weapons. A hole really had been dug into the building's foyer that went all the way down to the sewer, but although police examined every inch of the building and interrogated everyone there for hours, nothing was found to tie it to the Zebra shootings. "We stopped some fools from stirring up a lot of shit," Sanders explains, shaking his head, the frustration seeming as real now as it was 30 years ago. "But as far as Zebra went, it was just one more brick wall." As winter marched toward spring,
and the frustration level mounted within the Zebra investigation, the Officers for Justice lawsuit began to stir up tensions again as well. The lawyers heading up the OFJ suit in federal court, Robert Gnezda, along with his co-counsels William Hastie Jr. and Lois Salisbury, had scored a preliminary victory with the ruling of November 26, 1973. But what seemed like progress had quickly become an example of one step forward and two steps back. The SFPD, apparently complying with Judge Peckham's directive, took initial steps to allow more minorities and women into the department, for example, eliminating the height requirement and bringing both female and minority recruits into the academy. However, in February 1974, they reversed themselves on the height requirement, claiming once again that it was essential for good policing, and reinstating it. At the same time, they joined the POA in an effort to chip away at Peckham's 1973 decision through a series of appeals and challenges on specific, narrowly focused issues. Both the department and the POA knew that Peckham's ruling was far too persuasive for a higher court to overturn it on a direct appeal, so instead, their long-term tactic became to eviscerate it, to get Peckham to reverse all of the decision's significant provisions and, in effect, win by way of myriad cuts rather than with one single blow. In addition to the elimination of the height requirement, the SFPD, the POA, and the Civil Service Commission challenged stipulations having to do with the hiring of women, promotions, testing, and pay, to name just a few. Their multiple attacks created a tremendous burden on the limited resources of the OFJ and public advocates, the firm representing them, which could not match in money and manpower the alliance of city attorneys and private firms representing the other side. Outside the courtroom, the SFPD did its best to disqualify the women recruits they had been forced to accept by putting them through an even tougher physical regimen than the men, in an unfair effort to prove that women didn't have the body mass or strength to handle the job. The department simultaneously tried to sow division among blacks in the SFPD, appealing to African-American officers who hadn't aligned themselves with Officers for Justice to give statements that countered the OFJ's claims of discrimination. The obvious incentive was an expectation of personal advancement. This was a cynical tactic, designed to use the natural desire of all officers for better jobs and plum assignments to divide blacks, undermining the greater good by enticing an ambitious few. Sadly, in some instances, it worked.
It was a painful time for some of us,
Sanders says, recalling the tensions.
Some of the blacks who sided with the department in the appeal had been friends of mine. I think some felt they could gain favor by taking the other side, and that over time it might pay off. The truth was, they were being used, and instead of gaining favor, they were losing friends.
As part of their campaign first to circumvent Judge Peckham's decision, and then to gut it through multiple appeals, the department used various other ploys, many far from subtle, including intimidation both of OFJ and their lawyers, and of Judge Peckham himself. Once the department filled Peckham's courtroom with more than 200 white officers, including the entire SFPD tactical squad, who arrived wearing helmets and holding billy clubs. The scene was so threatening that Gnezda asked Peckham to clear the courtroom, asserting that his witnesses didn't have room to sit down. Peckham refused, instead instructing Gnezda to have his witnesses sit in the jury box and allowing the officers, weapons, helmets, and all, to remain. One of the SFPD's most deceitful ploys was their attempt to pad the number of minority officers on their rolls, which they did by fabricating ethnic backgrounds for some cops. In the department's initial count of minorities, prior to the preliminary ruling, there were only 3 Native Americans on the force. As the appeals process began, that number somehow swelled to 63. To Gnezda, Judge Peckham was a decent man who wanted to do the right thing. However, Gnezda also knew that Peckham felt tentative when it came to change and preferred to move things along at a snail's pace, rather than enable the kind of revolution the OFJ wanted. Gnezda understood perfectly well the game the SFPD was playing. So, rather than react with the kind of anger that might put Judge Peckham on edge and possibly prompt him to allow the inflated numbers to stand, he decided on a different tack. Standing before the judge, he began with irony, congratulating the SFPD on having accomplished one of the greatest feats in the history of affirmative action, increasing the numbers of Native Americans by over 2,000% in only a few months. The SFPD, he said, might now have more Native Americans than could be found in all the other police agencies throughout the state combined, and most impressive of all, they had accomplished this feat without hiring a single new officer. The judge scowled at Gnezda and asked if he was being sarcastic. Gnezda responded that he was. When Peckham angrily asked him what he wanted to do about the sudden upsurge in the number of Native Americans, Gnezda pulled out the ace he knew was sitting right there in court. William Hasty's wife, Cassandra, happened to be the head of the San Francisco office of the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission and had come to court that day to watch the hearing. So Gnezda told Peckham that he wanted the EEOC to serve as arbiter and have the officers in question appear before the EEOC and affirm that they were, in fact, Native American. Peckham agreed, with the stipulation that not coming in would be a tacit admission that the officer was not Native American. Out of the mythical 63, only 9 showed up at the EEOC. Then, at a hearing that followed, Gnezda made the second chess move, asking that Peckham order the 9 officers who said they were Native American to go to the Department of Justice and do the same thing under oath. Again, Peckham agreed. This time only 3 men showed their faces. As Gnezda would wryly put it later, there had been in court a slaughter reminiscent of Wounded Knee, with the scores of Native Americans claimed by the SFPD magically reduced to the original 3. Yet, as skillful as the OFJ's defense was, Gnezda and Hasty could not halt the city's Civil Service Commission from circumventing everything they had gained in court. One of the most important parts of the lawsuit, and one that could ultimately have the most wide-ranging impact on police departments across the country, was the assertion that the whole promotion process was slanted against minorities. When it came to changing the SFPD, promotions were the ultimate battleground. The old boys network that ran the department cared about maintaining control over who could join the force as a whole, but what concerned them the most was entry into the top brass, and what controlled that were the exams. Although the exams gave the promotion process a veneer of fairness, the truth was just the opposite. Eventually, it was proven that some of the tests given to minorities were statistically more difficult than those given to whites. More important than the tests, though, was the issue of seniority, and the way it was played to determine who was on track to become part of the brass. At the time of the OFJ lawsuit, no black officer had yet achieved the seniority to become eligible to take the lieutenant's exam. In fact, under the current system, it would be years before any black could take the exam, and years more before any might be promoted to lieutenant. Moreover, in a classic instance of Catch-22, no blacks could even begin the process of becoming eligible for the captain's exam until they had already made lieutenant. And the obstacles didn't end there. Promotions occurred only when there were openings, which were filled from a list of those who had passed the exams most recently, in chronological order. So even if a black did pass the lieutenant's exam, he would have to wait for every single white officer ahead of him to make lieutenant before he even had a shot. Gnezda surmised that if the system in place at the time of the lawsuit were allowed to remain, it would be over 25 years before an African American could make captain, meaning that no matter what the lawsuit achieved with respect to recruits, the ruling clique of the SFPD would remain white for at least another generation. Knowing this, Gnezda and Hasty tried to persuade the judge to enjoin the Civil Service Commission from making any promotions until the courts could decide the issue. Peckham, however, ignored their pleas, and the commission was permitted to forge ahead and fill the ranks of lieutenant and captain for years to come, enabling the all-white men's club that ruled the department to retain the upper hand. A lot has been written over the years about breaking through the color lines at various institutions. To Sanders, the integration of police forces, which has generally been ignored, was a milestone of far more importance in the fight for civil rights than anyone has ever acknowledged.
Everybody understands that integrating schools is important because it gives people a chance to better themselves. But people don't think about how important it is to integrate the police. In the same way schools have the potential to help people up, the police have the potential to hold people down. I'm not saying all cops are guilty of that. I'm a cop myself, of course. I believe in police, but you're a fool if you don't think they have the potential for it. Gil and I used to talk about how the only guarantee we'll ever have that a police force won't turn into some kind of armed gang holding down this group or that is to make sure that every facet of the community is represented on the force. is like a built-in system for checks and balances. Sanders and Guilford were both passionate advocates of the OFJ lawsuit. However, one detail about their situations was different, which made Guilford's advocacy even more intense and more pressing. He was 10 years older than Sanders, which meant he had 10 years less time to get what he wanted. Guilford never backed away from confrontation, racial or otherwise. From the moment he came onto the force, he was a figure blacks looked up to and whites respected, at least to his face. If they didn't, they would have to answer to him. When Gil and I were in robbery, back in the very early 70s, just before we both got promoted to homicide, we went in together on a Saturday to put in some overtime, Sanders says, recalling one incident in the Hall of Justice that could have turned tragic. There were about 10 guys there, all white, except for us. The inspector sergeant who ran the bureau on weekends dropped a stack of purse snatchings on our desk and said, "This is the kind of stuff you two can handle." The point was clear. We weren't good enough to solve a robbery any tougher than that. Well, Gil got in his face, and they went at it right there in the office, with fists flying. It got so bad that other guys got up to help the sergeant out. That was when I pulled my gun out of my desk drawer and laid it on the table, telling everybody to let it play out on its own. Guilford won the fight with the sergeant, but he could not win the fight with time, or with the institutional racism of the SFPD. If Gnezda's projection was correct that, failing a radical change, there would not be any blacks at command level in the SFPD for another 25 years or more, Guilford was out of luck. That truth made every loss in court not just a setback but something irretrievable, and every professional slight so much salt in a wound that might never heal. San Francisco has always been a city of extremes. Sometimes, though, even extremes can be taken to extremes. In March 1974, as the SFPD was taking on the twin terrors of Zebra and the SLA, and as Gnezda, Hasty, and the members of Officers for Justice battled the appeals of their civil rights lawsuit, San Francisco city workers suddenly decided to go on strike, demanding higher wages and increased benefits. Except for the police and firemen, all of the city's civil servants walked off their jobs en masse. For nearly 2 weeks, buses, streetcars, schools, and even the city's sewage treatment plants were shut down, adding transportation, education, and sanitation to the list of crises. The streets, swollen with commuter cars because of the stalled transit system, became nearly impassable, and a city that was already traumatized was reduced to a state of hysteria. Then came the bombing. The weathermen, who now called themselves the Weather Underground, had been operating in the Bay Area since 1970, when a bomb planted in the SFPD's Park Street station killed Sergeant Brian McDonnell and injured 8 others. Other bombings around the area were also linked to the Weather Underground, and just a year before Zebra began, the FBI discovered an abandoned bomb factory they had fashioned in the Fillmore. Now, amid all the chaos, they struck again. This bomb went off in the early morning hours of March 7th, blowing out a section of wall on the 4th floor of San Francisco's Federal Building, inside the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. A communique declared it a product of the Women's Brigade, and claimed the blast was a protest against the alleged forced sterilization of poor women in the South. Never ones to be out of fashion, the Weather Underground added a postscript, claiming that it was also an act of solidarity with the SLA. The SLA had become as controversial among radicals as it was among the rest of America. Most on the left denounced the group for kidnapping Patty Hearst. Perhaps the most eloquent was Jerry Rubin, who had been one of the stars of the radical left in the late 1960s and was a veteran of Berkeley's free speech movement, co-founder of the Yippies, and one of the Chicago 7, the group tried for inciting the riots at the Democratic Convention of 1968. When mass movements collapse as ours did in the early 1970s, Rubin wrote in the San Francisco Chronicle, and the problems of oppression remain and even get worse, hopes die, and terrorism appears. Rubin went on to appeal to the SLA to spare the life of Patty Hearst, saying that their tactics had already had a reverse effect, making a sympathetic figure out of the beleaguered Randolph Hearst. Under no circumstances harm her, Rubin concluded. That would be a crime outside the boundaries of any revolutionary morality.
Though Rubin's appeal was directed at the SLA, it echoed back to Zebra and applied to all the victims who had been left bloody, paralyzed, or dead in acts that no argument and no excuse could ever justify. Despite the appeals of Rubin and others, some groups, the Weather Underground among others, openly embraced both the SLA and their actions. Bernardine Dorn wrote a letter of her own to the Chronicle, taking a very different tone than Rubin. The system always holds, she argued, that its massive violence is legal, and that revolutionary violence by the people is illegal and outrageous. It is the opposite that is true. Later in her letter, Dorn went on to voice a conclusion that was the opposite of Rubin's, yet like his, it seemed to speak as much to Zebra as it did to Patty. We must acknowledge that this audacious intervention has carried forward the base public questions and starkly dramatized what many have come to understand through their own experience. It will be necessary to organize and destroy this racist and cruel system. Dorn gave voice to a new apocalyptic radicalism, one that longed for an Armageddon-like meltdown of what she termed the system. Each new act of terror was like another verse of Revelation, with the old world ending by way of bombs, kidnapping, or assassination. No terror seemed more biblical, however, than Zebra. It was like Revelation 11:8 come to life. Dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city. Terror without end.
And now, here's May.
Good afternoon. On Dialogue Conspiracy. April 29th, 1974. I was expecting some big news from Mayor Alioto in San Francisco. It seemed that he had some special announcement to make with regard to the zebra killings, and he rushed back to San Francisco, and all that came over the news that I could pick up before we went on the air today was that they had one of two guns that were allegedly used in these particular killings, and he referred to one gun as being, I think the term was cold or clean, that they couldn't trace the origin of where it came from. And that reminded me of the articles that Victor Marchetti wrote that are coming out in his book, the one on the CIA that's caused so much concern with the courts that they wanted to delete parts of these books so that the public couldn't read them. Victor Marchetti worked for the CIA for years, and in one of his comments about the CIA, which was in Computer and Automation in February 72, he talked about the fact that the CIA has a big depot in the Midwest United States where they have all kinds of military equipment, all kinds of unmarked weapons, and over the years they have bought everything they can get their hands on all over the world that is untraceable, to prepare for the contingency that they may want to ship arms to a group or a place. And they used to send buyers around to buy arms even from the Soviet bloc countries. Now, Marchetti claims that the members of the CIA that are involved in killings or assassinations are, that he says they're not immoral, they're amoral. The director made a speech to the National Press Club where he said, "You've got to trust us." This was Richard Helms. But Marchetti went on to say that the CIA was talking about infiltrating into the United States, doing more than gathering information, and that he felt it was very possible that they could take over in this country and with paramilitary operations such as Vietnam or Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Laos, and so forth, Philippines, all over the world. And I think that the weapon that's found in the zebra killing will be not much different than the weapon that Lawrence Kwong owned. He was the man who shot a man working at KGO radio station, Ben Munson, and then killed himself. And he was supposed to be a former mental patient, and the mystery of the doctors that treated him, the hearings were very hush about who treated Lawrence Kwong, what kind of treatment he had. And I've maintained on various radio shows that I believe he was electronically controlled and programmed, and we're going to talk more about that on the show today. And I feel they couldn't trace where his weapon came from, and I think we're going to find a large series of untraceable weapons, because I have said it before, and I'll say it today, and I'll say it in the future. I feel that what we're seeing now is the Phoenix program brought from Southeast Asia to the United States to start a race war in this country, and that these series of killings will just keep escalating, and it will be attributed to minorities and gangs, terrorists, where it actually is part of a military operation. One thing that Mayor Alioto said in San Francisco was that he was going to link 60 deaths to these particular operations up and down the state. Well, I could list 60 deaths up and down the state that are done by, or encouraged by, or protected by the law enforcement agencies, and I've maintained that there is this link of deaths, but that they're military operations and not radical murders, and they're not cult murders, but they are military operations to scare the population, to ask for police protection and a police state.
Context of white supremacy. Katherine Massey Book Club, first installment. This is our 5th session. Just finished up with the first section. We will resume. We are on the chapter Patty. We'll resume with more information. So we did hear quite a bit about the kidnapping of Patty Hearst in Michael Mayer's book, and the Symbionese Liberation Army. So at least there should be like a teaspoon of familiarity with people who have read all this before, even to hear Mae Brussell again. Not talking about Jonestown and the People's Temple, but specifically talking about the zebra murders and snatching up black people in San Francisco, and how she processed what was happening with all of these concurrent events and the Zodiac. How did she process all of that? She talked about all of that repeatedly throughout 1974, 1975. One way to try to go back and analyze, put all of this into context. Wacky times, the 1970s, and so much to study, learn, really about the science of white supremacy racism. Number to dial, 605-313-5164. The code 564943 #. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. All that talk about the Democratic Convention and such in Chicago. Woof. Timing. Katherine Massey Book Club. Number again, 605-313-5164. The code 564943 #. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Email untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. Before we get to my notes, callers, emails, last week one of our listeners wrote in and she had a question about a specific passage in the text, and I got a little discombobulated. It is a slight extra challenge for me because my ebook, for whatever reason, doesn't have specific page numbers, so I have to kind of hunt a little bit to track where I am in the text. But neither here nor there. She asked about a specific passage, and I didn't think we'd read it yet, but we had. She says, can anyone explain what this statement means? The odds of this dead Jones, as Sanders calls unidentified male bodies, being anything other than dead were non-existent, but rules were rules. We read that statement last week, that part of the book. My thoughts, he explained it there, that dead Jones, that's just their term. Instead of John Doe, I guess, if they have an unidentified body, dead Jones, right? And then he said that there wasn't any chance that this dead Jones was alive, but they still had to do some sort of examination or what have you. And my thoughts were, I've seen this before now that we've got a good solid year of doing true crime, where if a body is located there has to be someone with medical expertise. Like, it can't just be any old John Q. Law comes in, up, body, yeah, dead. Because the person might be unconscious. If you don't have medical knowledge, like to, be able to go and ascertain, are they still breathing? Do you have a pulse? That sort of thing, so that we're not saying someone is dead when they're actually not. That's, I think, what they might be getting at there, that the odds of this dead Jones, as Sanders calls unidentified male bodies, being anything other than dead or non-existent, but rules were rules. That's what I think they're getting at the end, too, about the rules. There's a code. You have to have, like I said, coroner, medical examiner, somebody with some knowledge go in to assess, yes, we have a corpse, body's dead, and they do declaration of death and, make it official type of a thing. Anywho, that's from last week. We'll get to emails from this week, notes, all that good stuff. Let's see. Email. Technically, I guess this is our first email since that's cleanup from last week. Email number 1. Greetings, Gus, listeners, and callers. A caller mentioned that the police response to Joey 22 was fundamentally different from the police response to the zebra murders, zebra cards, etc. One should also include a comparison with the police investigations of Reb and Vodka, Ronald J. Dominic, Jeffrey Dahmer, and 00 Swango. Very true. Now, you got with Michael Swango, when there started to be evidence and suspicion of his wrongdoing and even attempted murders and such, it was, whoa, we don't want to get in trouble. We don't want to put OSU Buckeyes. We've got this new wing coming and all the rest of it, right? So there were lots of reasons repeatedly where this guy could have been hemmed up, and no. Repeatedly, as he's traveling, New York State, Virginia, all the rest of it, and no. They don't even do background checks repeatedly. Let's see. Jeffrey Dahmer, since we talk about him at OSU, if we want to stick with that theme, with Jeffrey Dahmer, he had been stopped. If he had been prosecuted and treated in a correct manner, the way that they treat black males in Wisconsin, we probably would never even have known his name. All this would have been stopped way, way back, and that would have been that. Back when he was molesting and raping children, if that had been taken seriously. But, white people and children, and there we are. Chapter 7, number 1, page 182. 19-year-old Moynihan was holding a teddy bear that he got for his baby sister when he died. His parents were good people. What is meant by good people? And how was that determined? Mr. Fuller talks about that phrasing exactly in saying that on the plantation, no one qualifies as a good person. Not the racists, not victims of racism, none of the above. Best you could be is decent. 2. I used to wonder sometimes what would have happened if someone tried to tar me with what those killers were doing. Tarnished, not tar, is in the Neely Fuller Word Guide. They are about the same, right? I know tarnished is in there, but they are about the same. You are blackening me up by saying, real talk. They being individuals classified as white, they do think that is all of the Negroes. That's Obama. That's Michelle Obama. That's the children. That's Eric Holder. That's Al Sharpton. That's all the Comrade Kamala. That's what they do think. That's what they do think. All of you Negroes are in cahoots. You are going to try and get your comeuppance and hook up your black brothers. They said that when President Obama was running, you're going to get in there and hook up all your black brothers and get them welfare and victuals and all that and reparations and all the rest of it. They said that they've been saying that about Comrade Kamala right now. Radical, militant leftists out there protesting with George Floyd's radical lefties. Just keep doing the same thing. Tar. 3. Complicating matters was the fact that Nation of Islam is a religion and as such protected by a battery of constitutional rights. What? Many question marks. Given what we know about COINTELPRO, this statement seems egregiously inaccurate. Again, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, Grandcester, she said, it's written, she didn't just say it, it's written in the ISIS papers on page 1. She says, you are not qualified to talk about racism, white supremacy, and should remain silent unless you have read Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly's Racial Matters, the FBI's secret file on Black America from 1960 to 1972, especially given now what we know about, and in fact, I would even include in that the FBI's file on Malcolm X. Now, if they got him under surveillance like that, how in the world would they have not infiltrated the Nation of Islam, the Organization of African American Unity, Malcolm X's organization after he departed with Elijah Muhammad and NOI? How would that not be the case? Especially, you go back, Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, he told us 3-time guest on the Cows. We talked about that book, Racial Matters, twice. He told us, and it's written in the book, before the FBI existed, white people had snitches in so-called black communities. So-called. If you are rife with snitches, your enemy can come and pay off everyone on your block to snitch on you. That is not a community. That's been happening since the plantation. How in the world would the Nation of what do Minister Farrakhan, Wallace D. Muhammad, what do they know that no, we don't have no infiltration. We got the immunity to get out of here. Then they're not even making that claim. This white author is making that claim with no footnotes. Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, he didn't write nothing that sounded like that they had. And again, the FBI file on Malcolm X. It's a whole thick book. I submit that it would egregious lie. Chapter 8. 1. Dragging off Patty as what they called a prisoner of war. One of the male kidnappers was Donald Freeze, the Symbionese Liberation Army's African-American leader. The other was Bill Harris, a Caucasian. Most of us in Homicide never thought the SLA was involved in Zebra. Sanders recalls, my recollection is that the two names most publicized in the media were, of course, Patty Hearst, victim, the second being DeFreeze, who was also referred to as Sin Q, King Kong kidnapping the virtuous white female ingenue. The escapee did not need any embellishment by the press. The impact was visual with their pictures daily on the nightly news. Then, when she was implicated in a bank robbery, it became even more bizarre. I have no memory of the white dude, Bill Harris. What about all the white chicks? Again, what they said, 20-year-old white women. That is the majority of the Symbionese Liberation Army. How is it that they say some Negro that was in prison, he is in charge when you have got all of these intelligent white people who are not prisoners? How is he and again, we read Michael Mayer's. This group started totally different name with all black males as a prison Negro cultural group, whatever that means. How do white people take over the group, boot out all the black males except Sin Q? And now we're killing Marcus Foster with cyanide bullets, no less. And kidnapping Patty Hearst? Are you serious? I'm so glad we read about, or at least read a teaspoon about all of this prior to us getting to this book in the context of the People's Temple and Jim Jones. And again, Michael Mayer said, I think Jim Jones had something to do with the Symbionese Liberation Army. I think Jim Jones had something to do with the Zebra murder. He on the same street? Come on. 2. It had come out in early December that the FBI had been trying. Didn't get that far. See. More to come on COINTELPRO and the Nation of Islam. Pause there. We'll get to some of the folks who dialed in. I just will say quickly, I was able last week, try to be a victim of my word. I said last week when I read that report about Lynn Swann being stopped right at the end of January on the day of his him being drafted into the NFL to get a whole lot of brain damage by the Pittsburgh Steelers. First round, he won 4 flipping Super Bowls with them. And all that starts with him being assaulted and arrested and jailed with his homies, cousins, black males, the night of his being drafted. I did go and get the San Francisco Chronicle article where they talked about this, and dig this. It's on February 2nd. You can take that for Negro History Month, Carter G. Woodson, or Groundhog Day. I said, woo, because we ain't nothing. Same thing could happen right now. If they had zebra murders right now, and he was out celebrating, I got drafted, I'm going to go play in the NFL, woo, play against Pat Mahomes, play with Brock Purdy, maybe they'll draft me for the 49ers, I play for the home team, and break out their nigger knockers and everything. What are you doing? You smuggling fentanyl? Get on the ground. Shut up. Ah. They don't even have black people in San Francisco. What are you doing here? You been hanging with OJ? Groundhog, and they got a crispy picture of Lynn Swann in the same. Can you imagine that? You just went to USC. I've been drafted, and they got a good-looking picture of me. I'm about to start my new job, and what in the world? I tweeted at Mr. Swann to see if he remembers all of this. I would if we get a response from him, I will let you know. The only reason that I did not use that image when I promoted this event is because when I got the other newspaper articles from that time period, the end of January and February of 1974, OMGs. The same thing I said with the People's Temple. You can learn a lot. Just go look at the newspaper for this time. That's what Neely Fuller Jr. and Dr. Welsing and Dick Gregory, so many people that we say we have so much regard for, that one report, the gunman with a zombie look. Man, how many times are we going to hear zombie? And that's the word they use. That's not, me trying to be slick and putting the word in it. How many times? Jim Jones got all these zombies in San Francisco, and you got police officers saying that there were zombies with Jim Jones in California. This is way before we even got down to Guyana. And then you got these zombies who went and shot and killed Mayor Moscone and the zombies down in Jones. How many people are zombies during this time period? What? Come on, man. Where's Rick Grimes when you need him, man? That's why I didn't put the link, although I did post it so that people can see it, because I think that's important, that Lynn Swann is one of the victims in the zebra operation. Lynn Swann might have a zebra identification card. And getting him Dick might have acquired it on the day he was drafted. California State. Here, they should have one of those in the California State Museum. The zebra identification card. Mark the period. Let's see. Folks who dialed in. Always grand to hear folks in the California area. See if they have recollection, talked about all this. This would be another case like, Jesus Christ, I'm a black person, and we grew up in this area. Like, man, I'm going to have to nag and annoy all of my grandchildren and nieces and nephews. Like, oh, Jesus, God. Oh, that Uncle Gus, he got to talk about that all the time. Like, zero. Hey, that's bad. You bringing up old stuff. We heard about all that. That's really terrible. I've seen your zebra identification card. I don't want to hear nothing else about that. We got Steph Curry. It's good times now, man. We were in the Super Bowl. Like, I would have annoyed all of them talking about this. Like, are you serious? Operations. We couldn't even go. Folks who down here, we have folks in the California area. If you, have paid attention to, if you knew about all of this, let us know. Let's see. Folks with a hand up, Fresh Princess in Philly should be with us.
Good evening, Gus and callers. I had to catch up on this book, and I'm very conflicted in terms of how the Nation of Islam is being portrayed in the book as a criminal organization, and knowing that historically members of that religious organization have been associated with criminal activity, like the book Black Brothers Inc. which is about the NOI in Philly and just some of the things that people at a specific mosque were doing, kind of similar to what's going on out here, well, in this book, but not targeting white people. I will say that the organization itself has, over and above, been infiltrated by the FBI since their inception. So I am questioning whether or not these zebra killers were agents. I think you asked last week whether or not the narrator, where there were two different narrators. I feel like it's his black scent. I'm not really hearing a difference in the tonality of the voice. I think he's like putting on a voice that is supposed to sound ethnic. I don't think they're like two different people. I do find it suspicious that these people were blocks away from the People's Temple, and a lot of the same government characters were kind of involved in this as well. And with all the radicalism that was going on at the time, I feel as though that all of these things were a COINTELPRO, CIA operation geared toward perhaps starting some type of race war or civil insurrection in the United States. And I also find it odd that a lot of these things are taking place in California. It's because immediately following this time period, you have the crack epidemic and the influx of drugs into that specific area of the world. So, very interesting book. I am doubting a lot of the information that is being presented because I don't think we're getting a clear picture of how far and how deeply just the Nation of Islam has been infiltrated by the government just for decades. And I think they really took advantage of the schism that happened in the nation when Elijah Muhammad passed. So those are my comments. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Much obliged. Hey, if it's one thing race soldiers know how to do, Fresh Princess in Philly, it is take advantage of conflict between non-white people. No one does. Hey, we can stick right in the same subject matter. Minister Malcolm X, when she was talking about the Nation of Islam and criminal elements being involved, it's like, hey, that's one right there. Detroit Red, one of their more popular criminals, reformed and got things together, but all this started Detroit Red, right? But yes, the long reputation for that. And I mean, just that alone, if that is at least going to be a target group that we think we can, get some of these Detroit Reds and do some transformation, which is what's going to be needed to solve this problem. Great. But that's the same population that race soldiers recruit so-called informants and snitches from. Prisoners, people that are vulnerable. You want to be in solitary confinement, or you want to get out? You want to stay in there for another 10 years? You want these charges dropped. So-called carrot and the stick. Lots of different ways that they can, do things. But according to the evidence, Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly and many others, I think the Nation of Islam and all other individuals who are victims of white supremacy have been under surveillance. Anyway, she says she's conflicted. And I would say a book like this, it is challenging to ascertain truth because there are no footnotes. So he doesn't have citations for, claims that are being made frequently. So it's difficult to go and, where did you get this from? What is the evidence to, back this? That makes it a little more difficult. Any hoodles. Just extra context. There's so much San Francisco, like New York City, like Chicago, like Seattle, I said before, very literate region. Lots of libraries and local publications, local newspaper, even, well, more so previously than now, but lots of local journalism. So there was lots written about this way back in 50 years of when all this transpired. There's lots of material. And as I was going through to read, so they do all this for the zebra murder, and they're talking about, he used that term, terror, at the end of the chapter, Bennett Cohen, the terror that was happening, the Symbionese Liberation Army, and the zebras, and the panthers, and the gorillas. Oh, man. This is from the San Francisco Bay Garden, November 14, 1975. So skipping forward a little bit, but not that much forward. Murder, all bold letters, capital, stalks San Francisco's S&M scene. Now, even it's 2 a.m. on a Friday night. Men are pouring out of the stud and the ambush. Two popular Folsom Street gay bars on the deserted industrial south of Market Street. Singly and in couples, they start up cars and motorcycles. Soon the streets are totally deserted, quiet, except for the roar of an occasional late-night truck. And this area buzzing with industrial traffic during the day and humming with bar life at night. The bodies of 3 murdered men have been found since July. A 4th man was found similarly viciously murdered in a playground in Vistation Valley. 3 of the men who were murdered were gay and, according to the coroner's office, into sadomasochism. All 4 murders were extremely vicious, but despite the pattern of cruelty, the daily papers have given the murders very little publicity, and the police have failed to come up with any definite suspects. We have a killer like the Zodiac who is preying on the gay community. He killed white women as well. Pitt, a slender man wearing a t-shirt, told us at Forever Leather on Polk Street, he may be straight and he may be gay. Pitt and his partner, Gordon, run a leather shop whose offerings range from cowboy jackets to leather handcuffs, whips, and masks. Pitt is part of the most extreme side of the South of Market bar scene, sadomasochism. 90% of S&M is talk, says Jim as he polishes a belt buckle behind the counter at Forever Leather. It's fantasy trip. Pitt and Gordon agree. They show me a pair of leather foot cuffs. These are much safer than rope, Pitt tells me. Rope cuts off circulation. S&M sex, they tell me, is very different from these brutal murders. There's always a signal, Gordon says, that indicates when one partner thinks the game has gone too far and wants to end it. Most people wake up the next morning without a mark on their bodies, but the shop sells the fantasy, the trappings of violence. The better the trappings, they say, the less real pain. And I'll stop there, but it does mention the zebra murders in this week's edition. It's a lot of different, reports and such in the newspaper, but I just thought that, really, and in fact, they got other reports talking about Zodiac in here and all that. Like I said, that case was never solved, but just to kind of give you an idea, and this is 3 years, 3 years before you even get to People's Temple, Jonestown. So this was 1970s, Bay Area specifically. Man, drugs are bad. And then you add in the white supremacy, racism, and all that confusion, experimentation. Let's see, I'll get in some of my notes. Let's see. The talk of, he wrote that it made it difficult to investigate the Nation of Islam because they were a religion. I thought, now, the People's Temple, they were able to use that effectively. We are a religion, so we can loot all the SSI checks and steal all the children and all that. I haven't seen any evidence of the Nation of Islam, I haven't seen any evidence that they have been able to duplicate the People's Temple success with that we're a religion, so we get all sorts of leeway and discretion from prosecution. Let's see. When he said a white woman was grabbed by a black and dragged into a Cadillac, they told her not to worry because he wasn't one of those zebra killers, then he raped her, it was said. But it was also surreal like that. That's one right there. Like, can we get a report for that? Did this was this in the news? Like, I can't imagine like a Negro male grabs a white woman and throws her in a Cadillac and says all this. She survives. This got to be in the newspaper, right? Let's see. He said if you were black, you had to pause because the truth was there wasn't a black I knew who didn't feel at least an inkling of the same thing, anger. I don't mean the kind of rage that makes you want to murder. That's madness. I'm talking about the kind of anger that makes you want to change the world underneath your feet. I don't know. I had to pause on that. I don't know. I had to pause on that many times. I don't know. You all can let me know. Of the black people that you all know, people classified as black, your attempted care mates, children, parents, brothers, siblings, are they angry? I don't know. I don't generally, that would not be my thought process. Black people generally, I think, get angry at other black people. I do not. Now, it might be internalized, and you can get into all that, but in terms of like Malcolm X and, this is no count and I'm not going to take it and that type of thing. Like, he got people in the book nicknamed Smiley. I don't know. I had to think about that part of it. Next, he said, kind of rage. I don't mean the kind of rage that makes you want to murder. That's madness. That I had to pause on because white people do a lot of killing. It might be a race soldier needs to be terminated. I think that is a part of the conditioning of white supremacy racism, that is always supposed to be an anathema. And I don't think that should be the case. Like, race soldiers, yeah, that should be something to think about. They need to be eliminated. Maybe that's what needs to happen for this problem to be solved. But no, I don't think that is quote unquote madness. Certainly it would be better to not have to take a life, but man, the system of white supremacy racism is mass killing every day, all the time, in all areas of people activity. Anybody who is classified as not white. And then they go around and glorify, make movies and brag about the non-white people that they killed all over the world. Get Oliver Stone to put together 10-hour project documentary on Vietnam and Agent Orange and all the non-white people we bombed and killed and tried to drag old Muhammad Ali. We didn't even want Muhammad Ali fighting Joe Frazier. That happened in the middle of all this too. We didn't even want that to happen. He's supposed to be over there. At minimum, you entertain the troops, man. You keep up morale, because man, morale was sagging. We got all these heroin addicts coming back and such. He's supposed to be over there, but no, we got old Cassius Clay. And that's another one. You're going to tell me Cassius Clay becomes Muhammad Ali and you're not going to investigate these folks? Really? That's it. No, man, don't you put Mr. Sanders' name on this as an author. You stand by your work. Suspected race soldier Bennett Cohen, stand by your work. You put this together. And then put Mr. Sanders' name first. Come on. Let's see. The righteous kind of anger about making change. I think that's correct. But I'm reminded of Minister Malcolm X, man. Now, he didn't, go around talking, I'm going to kill every white person and all that. He certainly was about counterviolence, for sure. But being angry is correct. Not madness, not none of that. It is correct, particularly when injustice is being practiced against you and all of your attempted family, and it's been going on for centuries, and they're dedicated to it. It's correct. In fact, that's how you get things done. Exactly what he said. Start to get your feet moving. It might mean you might need to get your feet moving to terminate a race soldier. Maybe that's what needs to happen. That's not madness, just trying to find a solution. Produce justice. Let's see. Radical, again, what Bay Area, or not, Fresh Princess, which he said about the characterization of the Nation of Islam. Radical, that term, like I said, that word, extreme caution, because it's been my experience that it's they generally don't call white people radical. Now, they can go out and castrate black people and rape a whole bunch of black children, or children in total, or eat black people, Jeffrey Dahmer. They don't call them radical. They got a movie out there for Jeffrey, My Friend Jeff. They ain't call him radical. Now, if you're a victim of white supremacy, you get radical real quick. Just talking about, oh, we got these radical, militant, raging, angry niggers. President Trump called the white people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, he called them hostages. Hostages. Let's see. Oh, I mentioned the heroin. He said, Sanders said that he had a black male friend, Mr. Hilton. They had played brain damage football together in high school, and they hung out in the Fillmore, the Moore as it was affectionately known. Pause. I do think part of this episode was deliberate aspect of racial dislocation, getting black people out of the Fillmore area, because there's practically none there now, practically none in San Francisco. I think this was a part of it. Have to do more research on that. But he says Mr. Hilton was drafted, not to the NFL, Vietnam, came back addicted to heroin. That happened lots. Got whole books, movies about that. Even some say that was a part of all this, so we can go and get our narcotic, bring it back to help quench our Negro problem. Got folks leaning and nodding on heroin. They won't be out here protesting and riding and all the rest of it. Panthers and gorillas and Symbionese and all that. Let's see. Patty Hearst chapter. Woof. So glad we read about this previously. Let's see. Man, I'm going to tell you, when I went back to get that report on Lynn Swann and some of the other articles from the early part of 1974, I saw where Mayor Alioto, white man, his wife, vanished. This was in the papers, and I was like, whoa, she vanished? What? Vanished where? Where did she go? Like, what? I didn't invest the time to figure out, because they didn't attribute this to Zebra or anything, and I was just like, vanished? Like, what? Where did she go? So, to get the detail here, that this sounds like just, I am a suspected racist woman, his white wife, and I'm mad I didn't get the attention of that narcissism. I didn't get the attention that I think all this is going on. Patty Hearst been kidnapped and Zebra killings and all this, and they got Zebra identification. I'm a white woman, supposed to pay attention. I'm out of here. What in the, are you a teenager? Like, what? They got to waste all this time and be invented. Was she kidnapped? Did Huey Newton, O.J. Simpson, where is he at? And all the rest of it. And then, I just, pay me no attention. I need a few more compliments. What? What? Jesus, man. Let's see. When they were talking about Patricia Hearst, and she said, or they said that, or Bennett Cohen said, that she had all this wealth and affluence, but she was unaffected by her status, moving across the bay to Berkeley's student ghetto, blending in with classmates and living with her fiancé, Stephen Weed. What? What? Are you slumming? What? I don't think they had very many black people in Berkeley's so-called student ghetto, and I know they definitely don't have very many black people there now, but what? So you go where he can pay your rent and whatever else and go, man, white power. And so then the kidnapping happens with Sin Q and Bill Harris, a white man. weed gets confused and they're all Negroes who did this. At minimum, you're messing up the search because it was not all Negroes. And the Symbionese Liberation Army is mostly white people. They booted out most of the black dudes. But it gets repeated. He was confused. He took so many lumps upside his head that he got confused, and it was all black. He didn't get confused, and it was just all white people. I just saw a blur that just looked like a whole bunch of white dudes came in, and they just had billy clubs and jacks and pow, and no. Just a bunch of black, O.J. Simpson looking black dudes came and did this. Bunch of them. Let's see. Some reviewers griped about this book and said that they did not appreciate all of the extra detail about Prentice Sanders and all of the racism that he experienced on the police department. That is one, in my opinion, extraordinary strong component of the book, because I think that helps to put things in context for what was happening, and I think that would be omitting a major component of this history and this investigation, to have all these black officers when this is their daily extent. There are articles in the paper about this, in the Bay Guardian and the San Francisco Chronicle, when I say this, about the officers for justice and all these allegations and everything that we heard this week and that we've heard subsequently, that was in the paper too. So I think just if you were doing proper research, you would see, oh dang, they were having to go to court and blah, 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 and trying to get money, and then all the white resistance to this. So I do not agree, but that does not surprise me that a lot of white readers of this book would be disgusted. Like, I don't want to hear about all that. Just get to the murder and all that. Like, I don't want to hear about that, man. They messed up with a Christmas party because of these niggers. And that's not the zebras, man. Get to the zebra killers, man. Let's see. When he starts talking about he says Sanders and Guilford, black officers began to spend more of their time investigating, tapping their sources in San Francisco and the East Bay to develop information about where she was, the names, Patty Hearst talking about names of individuals who had taken her and what links there might be between her abductors and other radical crimes. And nobody knew information at this point either. Now then, again, they got all these sources, and this is on both sides of the people who don't know the geography. When they say East Bay, so now they're crossing the Bay. Now they're going over Oakland, Berkeley, San Leandro, all those areas once you cross the Bay Bridge, away from going east from San Francisco. You've got all of these snitches all throughout the East Bay area, and you're going to tell me that the Nation of Islam somehow is special? They have a unique brand of Negro that is just impenetrable? Get out of here, man. Let's see. He said they would use a lot of the prison groups. They would use white girls as couriers because they could go anywhere. Again, that is the power system of white supremacy racism still today. And they do all that talk about patriarchy and sex. White women do whatever they want. And that would be another one too. I just find it hard to believe at any time period that you would have black males in particular where they have that type of control and access to white women at their beck and call to bring them. Like, no, that doesn't even make sense. There would have to be some white people, period, involved in all of this to have you just got white women to spare to go and bring you knickknacks and put something on your commissary or what have you. Like, come on. Let's see. He says, now this is another one. Footnotes, man. The black gorilla family member who had a white girlfriend who got very upset and snitched on everybody. Again, if that's all it takes to mess with the wrong white girl, and I'm ready to snitch on every black person in Oakland, then come on. Come on. I don't think it would be that difficult to infiltrate the Nation of Islam or any other non-white people in the known universe, even if they don't use social media. Let's see. He said, and to further my point, when they go undercover, he said, we stopped shaving for a day or two, tossed on some black leather jackets and floppy hats, and looked like some pretty bad dudes. Is that all it takes to infiltrate Negro community? That's Negro culture. Beard, leather jacket, floppy hat. Oh yeah, that is sure enough shaft. Right on. That's embarrassing. Like, are you serious? Let's see. Whew. The department, this is why I'm glad it was included, the department simultaneously tried to sow division among blacks in the San Francisco Police Department, appealing to African American officers who hadn't aligned themselves with Officers for Justice to give statements that countered the OFJ's claims of racism. The obvious incentive was an expectation of personal advancement. This was a cynical tactic designed to use the natural desire of all officers for better jobs and plum assignments to divide blacks. No, and even that, he didn't say black people. That's in the word, Mr. Fuller's code as well. To not say whites, blacks, non-whites, to say people, because so much of this system is about dehumanizing non-white people, and you'll see that jargon very commonly, where it'll be the blacks. But I thought that was important as well, just because white people are extraordinary at creating and sustaining conflict between non-white people. We waste so much time and energy and lose focus. No one does it better. And that's with all that infiltrating and what have you as well. But particularly in the workplace, I think this is the sort of thing Fuller talks about as snitching. I'm going to go for personal gain and go and, say something that's not true or make up something that you can use. Now, sometimes, as he said, they're being used. Sometimes you don't know. You just, hey, I could get a raise and blah, blah, blah. You don't know how they're going to use all this. But sometimes it's, hey, I am aware and whatever. I just, I can get me a little bit of extra cornbread, whatever. Hey, in the weather say all the time, you don't have homies in the workplace. And even if you do, that's about what you can expect. Everybody, so-called human element, everybody would like a raise, a promotion. In fact, it might be as simple as maybe they are a little less racist towards you if you help them come in, help them with their case or what have you, shut these niggers down, we'll be a little less racist to you. We used to call you nigger 15 times a week. Now we'll drop it down to 2. That might be enough. Let's see. He said the officers showed up in the courtroom. Come on, that's why I said I'm glad he included it. The white officers showed up in the courtroom as a gang wearing helmets and billy clubs. Now you want to tell me about terrorism and thug behavior, dare I say, goon behavior. That's it right there. You're supposed to be a peace officer. You're supposed to be the best of the best. You're out here terrorizing your fellow officers who just want just treatment on the squad, and you got your nigger knockers in the courtroom? You're a disgrace to the shield. You should be fired on the spot. And that dedication to whites, that's not ignorance. I got my nigger knocker in the courtroom. That's not ignorance. Let's see. Oh, and then they did the whole, we got 63 Native Americans. They asked for an EEOC evaluation, and it drops down. Now we got 9. Hey, let's have this in a federal hearing where you're under oath. Perjury charges pending. Now it's 3. Master deceiver. I will check any box. I'm Laotian. I'm related to one of Jeff Dahmer's victims. You got a compensation? Yeah, for sure. I'm part Laotian on my mother's side, for sure. Check any box. Native American, my God, Elizabeth Warren, that's easy one. Like everybody checked that. You got check in with, oh yeah, I'm Native American on actually both my mother and father's side. I'm Native American, you know. I was at Wounded Knee as well. You got a casino in my name? Elizabeth Warren. They've been doing that one for years, centuries at this point. Let's see. They said they were most controlled about who could join entry into the top brass, meaning you have some real authority to do some hiring or change policy. We definitely do not need no niggers up here. Again, that's not ignorance. That is dedication to white supremacy, racism, white powers. Oh my God, I had to change my highlight. We could have played this for workplace racism. He said, although the exams gave the promotion process a veneer of fairness, the truth was just the opposite. Eventually, it was proven that some of the tests given to minorities were statistically more difficult than those given to whites. Are you serious? Can we send this to Dr. Umar? He said this on the program years ago. He said, man, you're not there when they grade the test. How do you know? He even said then, black people start taking these tests and they go and study and start, catching up to white scores. They change it up, make a more difficult test and all that. Whoa. Leroy we got to do something about that. Lakeisha is gaining on us. How do you, that's another one. What was the code to see like, we got Prentice in here today. That's a smart coon there. We're going to have to make sure we get him the extra difficult exam. Take you 15 hours to complete it. Meanwhile, the exam that I am taking, question 1, what is 1 plus 1? You're going to be rolling. My man Prentice is in there, square root of pi and 5 kilograms of cocaine. No calculator, no. Wait a minute. 15 hours. You're going to be in here 15 hours. Let's see. All of this resistance, deliberate resistance, willful, they got into a fight. The police officer came and I got some nigger work, some spade work for you all. That's about all you can do. Boom. He says, Gil says, I'm not going to take it. And they get into fisticuffs. Whew. I would not ever recommend getting into a fight, physical altercation in your workplace. That is about the worst thing you can do. This would be on tape now if this had happened. So, oh my God, everybody could get fired. At least if you're non-white, you expect to get fired. Maybe charged with assault too. And you're a police officer. Everybody here is armed, right? Oh my. He said he pulled his gun out. I'm surprised he was the first one. We got a rogue coon and I know, see, that's what I said. We thought that was you anyway. You might be zebraing out here. We knew you were one of them radical raging coons. Didn't want you here no way. I can't even imagine, like, you get into fistica with a white officer who, like I said, gotta be armed. And his homies are there. If he's not armed, he got his nigger knocker. Woo. Let's see. Anything else? I might be able to leave it there. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Man. If you did not get to share, jot it down. We will have ample time once the second audio segment concludes. Picking up on the chapter Patty for the kidnapping of Patty Hearst. Now, again, her dad running the Chronicle and the Examiner in the Bay Area, Randolph Hearst had Rupert Murdoch on my mind, but running all these major publications that end up being important for the coverage or lack thereof for the People's Temple 3-4 years later. Even at this point, they could have been running criticism, but they were not. Certainly they were not years later until it was too late. And then he said bodies in the street and all that, getting biblical about these niggers running wild in San Francisco. Man, he wrote this book years after Jonestown. Now, if you want to talk about biblical times and bodies in the street, no comparison. Let's round up. Let's give them 20 for the zebra murders. Man, it was 911 in Guyana. That is your bodies in the street biblical proportions. Jim Jones, Jesus and God. The Zebra Murders. Bennett Cohen. Katherine, Massey Book Club. Context of White Supremacy. Audio segment 2.
Just a few days before the strike began, Randolph Hearst, as part of his effort to win the release of his daughter, started a food giveaway program for the poor that had been demanded by the SLA. The Reverend Cecil Williams, pastor at the Tenderloins Glide Memorial Church and a well-known figure among Bay Area progressives, agreed to help Hearst organize the multi-million-dollar program, which would hand out cheese, milk, bread, and other staples at various locations around the Bay Area. The program kept going even as the city workers went out on strike, Hearst's private bureaucracy being so well funded that it could function when the city bureaucracy could not. Though it was greeted with high expectations, and many in the left began to think that something good might actually come out of the SLA's unforgivable actions, the giveaway degenerated into chaos in short order. So many people showed up at the places where the food was being handed out that riots nearly erupted. By the time the millions were spent, little had been accomplished, and the program seemed to have become a kind of metaphor for the failed hopes and unrealistic expectations of the radical left. Moreover, Patty was no closer to being free than ever. But giving wasn't the SLA's only concern. They seemed interested in taking as well, especially when it came to human beings. Angela Alioto was the youngest child of Joseph and Angelina Alioto, and their only daughter. In 1968, she married Joseph Veronese, moved with him into a home in Pacific Heights, and started a family. A decade later, Angela, a vibrant, dynamic woman who seemed to be cut from the same cloth as her charismatic father, would attend law school and begin a political career of her own. In the mid-1970s, however, she was simply a wife and mother. And when the fighting between Joseph Alioto and Angelina continued to escalate, following Angelina's disappearance, Alioto left his own house and moved in with his married daughter. Angela was happy to have him. They had always been close, and her spacious home could easily accommodate him along with her family. But the move soon had repercussions that neither she nor her famous father could have anticipated. It started with children playing games. A little over a month after Patty Hearst had been abducted, and just as the city strike was coming to a close, Angela's two oldest children were playing on the sidewalk in front of the house when a woman stopped to watch them, and then came over to talk. The woman was pretty, with light brown hair, and to a casual observer seemed like many of the 20-somethings who had grown up during the 1960s and were now drifting through the 1970s, a little vague perhaps, possibly a little directionless, but harmless. In truth, her name was Emily Harris, and she was known as Yolanda by her comrades in the SLA. No one ever found out exactly why she came to Angela's home, but there were only 3 possible reasons: to kidnap Angela's children, to kidnap Angela, or to kill the mayor. Harris asked the children if their grandfather lived there. They answered yes, he did. Before any more contact could occur, however, a nanny spied the exchange from a window and came out to whisk the kids away. Later, after Harris had been identified and Joseph Alioto realized that a member of the SLA had come to his daughter's home, he had a dozen or so men from the SFPD tactical squad move into Angela's second floor with their riot gear and automatic weapons. Members of the squad would live in her home day and night for more than a month. As far as Joseph Alioto was concerned, the tac squad was there to protect his daughter and grandchildren, not him. The truth was that after having spoken out so strongly against the SLA, Zebra, and the spate of radical violence that had swamped the city, he had turned himself into a prime target for assassination. As if to prove the point, the same week Emily Harris paid a visit to Angela's home, terrorists in London attacked Queen Elizabeth's daughter, Princess Anne, spraying her limousine with bullets as it approached Buckingham Palace, and injuring her bodyguard and others. Back in California, a subcommittee of the legislature felt that the threat of terrorism had become so dire, they published a report recommending that citizens begin a series of anti-terrorism measures, installing home security systems, and establishing neighborhood intelligence networks, creating a reactionary precursor to neighborhood watch programs to keep each other informed about anything that might seem unusual. While state and local law enforcement were devoting their assets to the twin purposes of finding Patty Hearst and solving the Zebra murders, 7 weeks had gone by since the Patty Hearst kidnapping, and more than 8 since the last Zebra shooting, with little progress on either front.
Every tip that came in, every source, every rumor, all of it went nowhere, Sanders says as he thinks back about the bitter frustration that pervaded investigations now. There were leads we thought were good, both with Patty and Zebra, but when we checked them out, we either got there too late, like the safe house on Golden Gate where we learned the SLA had been staying the day they left, or the tips turned out to be about groups that had no connection to either Patty or Zebra, like C.O.W.S and the other crazies we rounded up in the Fillmore rooming house. Yet we knew whoever we were looking for was right there, walking the same streets we were. San Francisco's only 49 square miles, 7 miles each way in any direction. Berkeley and Oakland aren't much bigger. But it doesn't matter how big a room is when you have to walk through it blind. And that's the way we were starting to feel. Making them feel even worse was the fact that the SLA kept releasing a stream of communiques and tape recordings of Patty to the press, advertising how easily they seemed to be evading their pursuers. Some communiques tried to reach out to other groups like the Weather Underground and the Black Liberation Army, looking to band together in what the SLA saw as the beginning of a revolution. Others, however, were merely childish and arrogant, chiding those involved in the food program and implying that nothing the pigs in power do could ever be enough. The tapes of Patty had a different quality to them than the communiques. The written documents were generally dry and filled with revolutionary jargon. By contrast, the tapes from Patty seemed plaintive and vulnerable, at least at the beginning. As Sanders recalls, "We would listen to those early tapes on homicide, and let me tell you, they broke your heart. It was like the hostages you see now in Iraq. You knew Patty was scared, but she was still trying to reassure her friends and family that she was all right. Then the tapes changed. An edge seeped into her voice. It made you wonder what was going on with her, and it frustrated you. Cops protect people. That's our job, but we couldn't do a thing to help Patty. Cops are creatures of action. We're at ease when we're in motion. But things had stalled to the point where we were starting to feel frozen in place, covering the same leads over and over. Clues are like blood. After a while they dry up and seem of little more use than dust." Chapter 9. Flashpoints. It's hard to say what makes killers kill. Earl Sanders was not speaking about the psychology of what prompts murders. The emotional underpinnings of some killers may stay shrouded forever, but more often than not, in Sanders's experience, the broad outline of what causes a killer to develop over time becomes clear in the course of an investigation. His point was to question what it is that causes a killer to kill now, to choose this day, this hour, this moment. When a killing occurs out of passion or during a robbery, the triggers are clear. But when it's random, like in Zebra, the why now that triggers the act gets tougher to pin down. It could be something as big as avenging someone's death, or as little as reacting to someone stepping on your shoes. Or even reading an article in the newspaper. Duffy Jennings, a reporter for the Chronicle who regularly covered homicide throughout the 1970s, developed a two-part feature about Dave Toschi and William Armstrong that centered around a current case they were investigating. It's not surprising he chose to spotlight them. Known as the Zodiac Twins because of their long involvement in that case, Toschi and Armstrong were already recognizable names to the public. But there was another reason that made the choice predictable: Dave Toschi's passion for publicity. "You couldn't help but like Toschi as a person," Sanders says as he recalls his former colleague. "He was like a character out of the old Rat Pack, smart, funny, stylish, Italian. But he had a thing about seeing his name in the paper. We all knew it. And no matter how much you might love Dave, if you wanted to play things close to the vest, working with him was a problem. We ended up being teamed a number of times, and on half the cases it seemed like the press would get to the crime scene before we did. I sure as hell didn't call him. But when I looked at Dave, he would throw up his hands like, 'Who, me?' You hate to criticize people unfairly, but unwanted publicity was something that everybody who worked with Dave had to deal with." Bill Armstrong managed to deal with it for over a decade. Armstrong was more like Toschi's anti-twin than his twin. The two were polar opposites, Armstrong countering lust for publicity with a deeply private nature. He was also as thorough a cop as they come, and possibly too empathetic for his own good. Although officially the two of them handled the Keita Haig murder as a team,
It really was Armstrong's case. He was the one who responded to the scene and witnessed the unfathomable bloodshed. He was the one who interviewed Richard Haig the next day, and he was the one who kept in touch with Haig, calling to see how he was feeling physically and emotionally, and how the many surgeries he needed to repair his wounds had progressed. The headline of Jennings' article stated, "They're tracking down a killer." The case he was writing about had nothing to do with Zebra. But with Zebra still so much a part of people's thoughts and fears, the headline seemed to allude to it nonetheless, and the tone of the article was reverential. Cops are not the only ones who like publicity. Killers often have a craving for it too, especially when publicity is a weapon in itself, as it can be with terrorists.
9 times out of 10, killers like the ones in Zebra are sociopaths, Sanders observes. The whole world revolves around them, and anything they do is justified simply because they do it. When you're as narcissistic as that, it feeds into everything, including killing. And when you see an article that glorifies the people who are after you, it can act like bait. You want to show you're smarter than them, better than them, and there's only one way to do it. Kill and get away with it. Again.
It may never be proven that the article was a trigger for violence, but according to testimony given at the trial by Carolyn Patton, Anthony Harris's ex-wife, and others, some of those involved in the Zebra attacks were acutely aware of the media coverage. Patton recalled, for instance, that after returning home on the night of the attack on the Haigs, Harris turned on the television, curious to see if there were news reports about the assault. After 9 weeks of inaction by the killers, the first part of the Jennings article appeared in the morning edition of the Chronicle on April 1st. When Part 2 appeared 24 hours later, it would be eclipsed by a far bigger story. The Zebra killers had struck again. Throughout the Zebra investigation, Earl Sanders recalls being plagued by a feeling that the whole world had gone insane.
It wasn't just in San Francisco. It was everywhere. Washington, the Middle East, Chile, Wounded Knee. There was craziness no matter where you turned. Even when we were stuck spinning our wheels on Patty and Zebra, it still felt like things were moving a mile a minute because the whole world kept blowing up all around us. Like Watergate. I remember Haldeman, Ehrlichman, and the others were indicted at the same time as we were searching for Patty. It was chaos, and no one had a clue when it would end.
As Watergate again dominated the media, the craziness back home in San Francisco took another twist when Sanders and Guilford learned that a handful of white supremacists planned to kidnap the daughter of Belva Davis, the first black TV newswoman in California and one of the most visible African Americans in the Bay Area. According to their informants, their would-be abductors had ties to the Aryan Brotherhood, a racist group that had been formed inside California prisons around the same time as the Black Guerrilla family. They intended for the kidnapping to even the score for what had happened to Patty. Before the attempts could be made, though, Sanders, who was a friend of Davis, put her home under around-the-clock protection. Even so, before long she and her husband, TV news cameraman Bill Monroe, moved out of San Francisco and headed across the bay to the hills above Berkeley, where they felt they were at least a little farther from harm's way. Yet even as Belva and Bill fled the madness, Thomas Rainwater and Linda Story, 2 young people who lived at the center of it in the Fillmore, appeared barely to notice it. In many ways, Thomas and Linda seemed to live in another place and time. This quality lent them a kind of purity, as if they were beyond the madness. But ultimately, it couldn't protect them. At 19, Thomas Rainwater was a first-year cadet at the Salvation Army School for Officer Training in San Francisco, one of 4 regional training schools run by the Salvation Army. Thomas's dream was to do missionary work and help run an orphanage. A natural preacher, he spent much of March in a 2-week evangelism campaign with others from the training school, giving sermons before Salvation Army congregations in Arizona. The last sermon he delivered was at a congregation in Phoenix, where he gave a talk entitled, "One Life to Live, One Life to Give." Linda Story was 2 years older than Rainwater, but her dreams were much the same. Like him, Linda was a first-year cadet, and the two had grown close. On the night of April 1st, they had made an innocent date to spend the 90 minutes of their free time between study period and curfew alone together. It had been raining all day, but there was a slight break in the showers as the young couple left the training school at Laguna and started up Geary in search of a late-night snack at a supermarket on Webster, just a block below Fillmore and Temple No. 26. Fellow cadets passed them on the way. A larger group had gone out earlier and now was heading back. But Rainwater and Linda took their time. The ground was wet, the air was moist and fresh from the rain, and the natural beauty of the city seemed far more real than any of the fears that had been plaguing San Francisco for so long. It had been 2 months since the last shooting, and the possibility of another seemed remote. Just as the couple approached Webster, a man came around the corner and passed them, but then stopped. Linda turned to say something to Thomas. That's when she saw the man again, and the gun in his hand, held point-blank toward Thomas's back. Even on a misty Monday night, that area was far from deserted. Both witnesses and police officers were in ample supply. 2 plainclothes vice squad officers, Dennis O'Connell and Daniel O'Brien, were standing in a parking garage across the street, so close that they were able to reach Thomas and Linda in less than a minute after they heard the shots. 2 uniformed officers were also nearby, in a car only a block away. Some people sat by the window, above where the young couple walked. Others drove by in their cars. The officers in the car commented afterward that if the shooter had gone one way instead of another, he would have run right into them. Others who said they saw the shooter could make out only the army jacket and dark trousers that he wore. One woman called to the killer from her upstairs window, asking what happened, not realizing he was the one who had fired the shots, but she too couldn't identify him. Not even Linda was ever able to say exactly what he looked like. Part of the reason was the shadows created by the dense foliage that hung over the narrow sidewalk. But as Sanders points out, sometimes luck is as much a factor in getting away with murder as it is with anything else, and with Zebra, the killers were getting all of the luck. At the instant Linda turned, the killer pumped 2 bullets into Thomas Rainwater's back. Then he pivoted toward Linda. She was running when the first 2 bullets hit her near the waist, sending her sprawling to the ground and causing the 3rd bullet to miss. As she lay in the street, not knowing if she would live or die, the man turned and entered some bushes that bordered an apartment complex, disappearing into the night. After he was gone, Linda realized she could feel her legs. Although 2 bullets had hit her in the back, both had missed her spine. If there was any luck to be had, it was in that. Sanders and Guilford were still at the Hall of Justice when the call came in. For more than 3 months, even during the lull in Zebra attacks, there had been no nights except late nights. Sanders kept track of his overtime in the same notebook he used for notes on cases, and a glance at a few days from this period reveals how demanding the work had become. Zebra OT. Sunday, 16 hours. Monday, 7 hours. Tuesday, 16 hours. 16 hours of overtime means a 24-hour shift. They had hoped that Monday would not be so harried, but hope and reality are often far apart. That weekend there had been an escape from San Quentin. George and Larry Steiner, 2 brothers who had been serving life sentences for killing a couple of Black Panthers in a radical turf war in Los Angeles, had somehow managed to slip through the prison's security. Now they were on the run, and Sanders and Guilford had spent their day checking sources all over the city to try to find some trace of them. Most of the people they talked to thought the Steiners were already long gone, heading for a safe house somewhere down south on their way out of the country. Beyond relaying what they'd heard to cops in L.A., there was little that Sanders and Guilford could do, so they decided to call it a day until they were interrupted.
Whenever a call about a homicide came in, the first questions asked were whether or not it was a small-caliber weapon, had black male suspects, and had a clear motive, Sanders recalls. If the answer was yes to the first 2 questions and no to the third, it was handed over to the task force to check out. As the team officially heading up the Zebra Task Force, Gus Carreras and John Fotanos became the inspectors of record on all the shootings after the night of January 28th. With the expansion of the task force after that date and the allocation of more resources before Patty, they had chosen 2 young inspectors from burglary, Carl Klotz and Jeff Brosch, to work alongside them and run down any tips or witnesses they wanted checked out. Even so, when it came to the homicides themselves, the division of labor remained largely the same, with Sanders and Guilford, the 2 inspectors originally detailed to work full-time with Carreras and Fotanos,
as well as a few others in the Bureau, like Ed Erdelatz, devoting the majority of their time to zebra work, picking up wherever the Greeks left off.
At first, Gus and John and Gil and I would trade off, with them taking one case and us the next. Even when all new cases became officially theirs, it was so hectic that if they got caught up with something and a new shooting happened, Gil, me, or one of the others would have their backs and take the lead for a while.
When this call came in, everyone's mind instantly went to the same place: Zebra. As soon as they learned that the new shooting met all the criteria, small caliber weapon, a black assailant, apparent lack of motive, Sanders and Guilford grabbed their car and sped the 2.5 miles to the crime scene, heading up 6th to Turk and then continuing on Webster. The Fillmore was where Sanders and Guilford grew up, and they knew its streets so well they navigated them without thinking. It was their playground, it was their home, and it was in chaos. Less than an hour after the shooting, over 50 cops had flooded the streets of the Fillmore. The killer had been seen running into an apartment complex that had originally been built by the Longshoremen's Union to provide their workers with good, affordable housing. The complex was now open to everyone, but remained what the Union had wanted: a pleasant place for families to live. Yet despite the fact that the shooting occurred in a location and at a time when there were plenty of witnesses, the shooter had again managed to slip away, leaving no trace except the spent casings of a .32 handgun. Standing at the murder scene, Sanders couldn't help but notice the yellow brick of Temple No. 26 just a block away, close enough to break one of its circular windows with a rock. Staring at its facade, he weighed the feeling that he and others in homicide had had about a likely involvement of the members of the Nation of Islam in Zebra, before the Hearst kidnapping had taken them in other directions.
There was still no real evidence, Sanders explains, but crooks do their crooking where they're comfortable, even killers, and this was just a block from the temple, so it was one more thing pointing in that direction.
Even with the camera surveillance of Temple No. 26 being conducted from the Miyako Hotel, there was not sufficient evidence for a warrant, and therefore still no way legally to search the temple or any other building associated with the nation. But standing there and contemplating the institution at the fringe of yet another Zebra crime scene, Sanders came to a realization about the ways in which Zebra, a case of black-on-white terrorism, mirrored and even validated the OFJ lawsuit that Guilford, he, and others were pursuing at the exact same time. It struck home.
The only way to break through the silence that surrounds a group as secretive as the one behind Zebra, whether they were from the nation or not, was to have the kind of presence that would allow you to gather grassroots intelligence so you can find out who the players are and get some to roll on others. Gil, me, Herman Clark, Knapp Hendricks, Willie Johnson, we all had contacts, but we didn't have the numbers you need for something like that. And the reason we didn't was exactly what we were dealing with in the OFJ suit: racism. That's when it hit me. The same thing that sparked the killing was getting in the way of solving it. As hateful as the killers were, it was racism that lit the fire that burned inside them. And it was racism that kept the department so white we didn't have enough black officers to infiltrate a group like the one we were after. While Carreras and Fotinos oversaw the crime scene, Sanders, Guilford, and the dozens of others who responded to this latest shooting spread out across the Fillmore, searching for clues, going from the clubs to the bars to the little park at Fillmore and Ellis where the dealers and hookers hung out, and waited for junkies and tricks to come looking to score one way or the other. Apart from the shell casings collected by criminalists, however, no new evidence was gathered. Frustrated once again, the SFPD decided to fill the streets with dozens of unmarked cars at night, instituting indefinitely a clandestine Zebra patrol. The hope was that one of the cars would happen upon a shooting as it was about to take place, or else be close enough to catch the killer or killers as they fled. It was an understandable move, but it was also the beginning of a series of desperate measures that could risk the very thing that the court testimony of both Anthony Harris and the woman Jessie Cooks abducted and raped would ultimately attest the killers were after: a race war. For a day and a half, Zebra took over the news once more, the gunshots and the terror they aroused echoing in the media and among the public. Local newspapers heralded another senseless street slaying, and the walk that ended in death,
And the Chronicle ran a feature about the Linda Story shooting, headlined Anguish of Gun Victim's Mother. On a segment of the national CBS Evening News anchored by Roger Mudd, Charlie Barca admitted to his interviewer that the police felt helpless. Then, an unexpected communique from the SLA announced that they might release Patty Hearst soon. Radical lawyer Vincent Hallinan and Assemblyman Willie Brown were among those chosen to talk to her once she was freed. As the whole Bay Area anticipated Patty's release, Guilford, who was one of Brown's best friends, was sure the police would make some sort of move against the SLA as soon as she was handed over. Less than 24 hours later, a very different communique jolted everyone's expectations. Instead of going free, Patty had chosen to join the SLA. I have been given the name Tanya for a comrade who fought alongside Che in Bolivia for the people of Bolivia, she claimed in a lengthy, rambling statement. Suddenly, Patty Hearst, granddaughter of one of the most successful capitalists in the history of the United States, had joined the revolution. It is in the spirit of Tanya that I say, Patria o muerte, venceremos. The quote, meaning homeland or death, we will win, came from the Cuban Revolution and was a rallying cry for the Cuban people to rise up and fight. Patty, like her newfound comrades in the SLA, like the Weather Underground and the men behind Zebra, had embraced the apocalyptic left bent on bringing down white America in a fiery crash in which, as Jesse Lee Cooks had told the woman he abducted and raped back in October, people were going to be killed and the streets would be lined with blood. Patty's captors, who envisioned a similarly violent future, had convinced her that her parents did not care whether she lived or died. Consequently, she decided neither did she, and she picked up a rifle, put on a beret, and had her picture taken in a defiant stance of rebellion. As irrational as that act seemed, Sanders points to sports, not politics, as the real measure of just how senseless and out of control America had become. The same week that Rainwater was killed and Patty joined the SLA, Henry Aaron tied Babe Ruth's record of 714 home runs. A week later he broke it, and he did it with people threatening to go to games with high-powered rifles and kill him. Not because he had done anything wrong or committed any crimes. They wanted to kill him just because he was a black man breaking a white man's record. This is baseball I'm talking about. Sports. And it was on the verge of exploding into a race war the same way Zebra was.
Gus T's blog is Racism is War. If you have individuals who abuse and terrorize you unjustly in all areas of people activity, including taking your life, that is war. I've said for years, hey man, when you hear people, or if you yourself are in a habit, the rhetoric sometimes, we just repeat what we hear. We are at war. This will be a non-white person, often someone classified as black, will say, well, you know we're at war. No, man, we are not at war. Racist man, racist woman, racist child, they are at war with non-white people, and they are winning. That is not the case with non-white people. And it goes back to what I said before. Do you think black people are angry? The people that you know. You have children. Are they angry? That's why we're, you have to kind of, man, what is wrong with, fix your face. What is wrong with you? Scowling and whatever. What is, really? Have to ponder. Number to dial, 605-313-5164. The code 564-943#. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. I am whipping or wigging out a little bit. Because Belva Davis, white supremacists are going to steal her child. Like, do what? Do what? I I sat there and told you all, Biography Kings, I'd never even heard of Belva Davis, and I got her biography, Never in My Wildest Dreams, A Black Woman's Life in Journalism. Forward by Bill Cosby. But I got this as we were reading, and Maya Angelou signed the cover. I love it. But I'd never heard of Belva Davis. Maya Angelou connected to San Francisco, so I'm sure she saw a lot of Belva Davis watching TV in the Bay Area. But I knew she wrote a whole chapter about the People's Temple and talking about spies. Oh my God. Belva Davis, I told you, she had a People's Temple member working in her house. Died in Jonestown, we think. He liked to spy on the journalist. She was putting all this together. Did she put a chapter in the book about her child being kidnapped? I'm not going to read the whole thing or anything. I just want to, because I was going right to Jim Jones, let's see. The racial rebel. She talks about being the first black winner at a beauty pageant and all that. Lovely black female, talented, on TV for all of those years. What in the world? Let me see. Oh, there it is. Are you serious? Are you flipping? Yep. Let me skip through to see about the kidnap. Oh, there's Marcus Foster. She wrote about that too. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Let me see. Does she have? She goes to Oakland. Sinai. Yep. He gets killed. Symbionese Liberation Army. Donald DeFreeze. Yep. She talks about all this. Patty Hearst. Yep. Let's see. She emphasizes, released an audio tape. Let's see. A few weeks later, the bell rang just before I left for work, and I opened our front door to find an El Cerrito policeman on my porch. At first, I thought he was passing along information for some story, but then he posed a question that made me feel as though we were plunging my head into a bucket of ice water. Do you have a daughter that attended El Monte School? I passed into the panic-induced time warp where everything slows down. Part of my brain realized I was inviting him inside, but another part strained to pick up confirmation that Darylyn still was safely down the hall. I felt a surge of relief when I heard her singing obliviously off-key as usual. I imagined her primping at the bathroom mirror before racing to gather her books. In a moment, she'd rush in, kiss me goodbye, and dash off to meet her best friend Roberta for some gossip before school. Only that wouldn't happen that morning. Her young life was about to change. We have reason to believe that there is a credible threat against your daughter, the officer was saying. She may be marked as a target for a kidnapping. My hands began to tremble. I had prided myself on standing strong even in the crucible of riots, but now I felt my courage evaporate. Darylyn rounded the corner and gave the policeman sitting on the white velvet living room couch a friendly, inquisitive smile. I reverted to autopilot, adopting an air of assurance even amid chaos. Offering an upbeat smile, I introduced them without offering an explanation, allowing her to believe we had been discussing news business. She wasn't ready to hear the truth, and I wasn't ready to tell it to her. Dee Dee, and seeing her frown, I broke off. For the past few weeks, she had been reminding me to drop the nickname. She was too grown up for that now. I started again. Darylyn, I'm going to drive you to school today. We'll have some girl time. Her face twisted in annoyance. But I have to meet Darylyn, I interrupted in a sharp tone, catching her eye. Surmising that further argument would be futile, she stomped back to her room and shut her door. I returned my attention to the policeman in my living room and dropped my voice. Who on earth would want to kidnap my daughter? He toyed with his cap, running a finger inside the band. As far as we can tell, the threat is coming from members of a faction of the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels? The motorcycle gang? I was incredulous. When he nodded, my questions tumbled out. Why would they go after my daughter? I haven't even done a story about them. The officer's gaze signaled that I needed to let him finish. As far as we can pick up, this would be in retaliation for the Patty Hearst kidnapping. Why? I halted, flabbergasted. But if the past few years on the job had taught me anything, it was that rational explanations for mayhem were hard to come by. Ma'am, these guys are thugs, he continued. They're pretty angry about a white girl being kidnapped by this black... Oh, my God. They're not black radicals. It's a bunch of white chicks and a white dude, Bill Hare, and then Sin Q. But it is not black. See there? One black, that's all it takes. And we got these niggers. They look, what? Come on, man. Come on. If it was a bunch of black people and one white person joined the Black Panther Party, we got these white people, man. They don't even know what they're doing out here putting on berets and floppy hats and leather jackets, man. Let's see. Anything else? Talked about one be even score, taking a black girl. Also, they think you're Angela Davis's sister. Are you serious? I blinked in disbelief. The scene would have been farcical had it not been so frightening. Did these faceless bikers really think Davis was such a rare surname that the mere fact that Angela and I share the same name and dark skin was proof that we were sister? I can't even read anymore. I'm done. What a book. I had no idea, because she does have a whole chapter on the People's Temple, which I fast forwarded, read, highlighted. Oh my God. And she talks about other components of racism. I already told you I had such a guffaw that, what? Bill Cosby wrote the foreword. What? Like, it's amazing, but dang, they tried to kidnap her daughter. Wow. What? Biographies. I love biographies. They are amazing. Never in my wildest dreams a black... Really? How could you... And then all of this, you still got 4 years before Jonestown. And the assassination of the mayor. Woo! What a decade. Never in my wildest dreams a black woman's life in journalism. Belva Davis. Bill Cosby. Let's see. Folks who dialed in, pardon for me taking a little bit of extra time. Bay Area Mom, have you seen Belva Davis? Do you know who that is? If someone said on the street, Belva Davis, do you know who that is? Can you give us a sentence and we'll give you $1 million? Would you have got the $1 million? Could you have given them 2 sentences on who Belva Davis is?
Could I have given them 2 sentences? Probably not. I could give them 1. I remember her from Channel 9, though, because I'm a KQED kid. So I remember her from Channel 9. She used to be like, I don't know, the news stuff. So that's what I do remember. But other than that, no, I couldn't give you 2 sentences. Just the lady on Channel 9. Because out here in California, KQED is Channel 9. So, yeah, that's all I know about the lady. I didn't even know about her kid getting kidnapped because I'm not of that age. I am old, but when all that happened, I was a child, so I didn't know. I had to even inquire on how people were feeling in that moment, just to get maybe some kind of connection to how my mother could have felt about that incident, because she died when I was 12. So as far as even knowing, paying attention to anything, people didn't talk about that kind of stuff. So the way my trauma was set up, I'm just trying to figure out why I'm out here in Oakland or Richmond, or you know what I mean? Why am I here? It's because of these incidents. It made a culture. It made a energy here. Because once I got here to this, because I'm in California, so I was in Los Angeles, but it's a bit different. It's different issues. So, and then whatever was going on in Jonestown, you may have gotten people that way, but it was centered in this area. So if it was talked about, I didn't care because I was a child. So, and then as I'm growing up, nobody's talking about it, especially out here. Once I got to Oakland, I got this way at 12. Nobody's talking about anything but don't drink the Kool-Aid. So you don't know anything because no one's sharing anything. And then you could have people, giving commemorations and coming together, discussing it, maybe the victims that are left or their family, but verbally, they're deemed as crazy. So the word is they're crazy people that follow this white man. So nobody really, we didn't connect to that like that. Oh yeah, the crazy people that follow the man and drank that Kool-Aid. That's it. So even with the zebra killings, nobody's talking about that to us. No one's preparing us for be careful. There's people kidnapping kids or people, assaulting other people. We don't know we don't know that. So, and then as kids, after that, one of your callers stated before the second clip about how thereafter these situations, because that's right, 1979, 1980, 81, that crack era came in. So that's where I come in. So that's where we move. That's all of that. So that's my ding, ding, ding. That's us. So I don't mean we didn't have to use dope. We could, I didn't have to sell drugs. So I'm just saying we didn't use it, but it hit all of us. It hit us through our schools. We took over the schools. I say we collectively because I'm in the passenger seat. So because the guys took care of us with the drug money that they received from that setup, because we were told, just say no to drugs. I'm in L.A. in elementary school in our lemon heads and Boston baked beans, because every school has a store. So you open it, just say no to drugs. We didn't know what drugs were except for like Leon Isaac Kennedy, and those kind of movies. Other than that, we didn't know what drugs were. And then by the time we became teenagers and that era hit, it was a different story. So yes, that is true, that was the next cycle, the crack era. Patty Hearst. I've always been interested in Patty Hearst because I just thought she was just full of, I just didn't believe she was kidnapped like that. I believe it was something else. I never just thought she was just, the bank robbers kidnapped her. And the way he paints her story in the book as if she was this naive, innocent jewel, just kidnapped and, forced and coerced, that her family didn't love her anymore. And they just made her, and she just felt so awful. And without the love of my family, I want to die. You know what? I'm just going to put on this Afro wig, and I'm going to get this gun. My mama don't love me. My daddy don't love me. I mean, just like Malibu's Most Wanted, it was just so sad. So the way they portray her, even to create Stockholm Syndrome behind her, it's just a whole setup to me. And and she's still alive today, just living her, training dogs, just doing her thing. It's just, she's just an innocent angel. I just believe, even that, whatever I can't think of the acronyms for that gang that they created, because it was black people at first, and then next thing you know, it's only one black person and all these other white people because you destroyed the whole movement. I believe that whoever the extras that came into the setting, they all worked for whomever they worked for to work together to make sure Jim Jones, everyone else, did whatever they had to do to help destroy us. And I do believe that, like you said, Gus, that's another way to flush the black people out of Fillmore. Just for that instance, all the stuff that they're doing, that was a good way to do that. And I'll stop rambling. Thank you for taking my call, and I'll mute myself.
Much obliged, Bay Area Mom. I have to do more research because they have whole projects about the disposal of black residents in the Fillmore district, but I would have to see like the exact years and such of when the population really started to dwindle and all of that, but I strongly suspect that this was a significant portion of that removal process. Much obliged, Bay Area Mom. Again, study, read at least local history. Say that for everyone, regardless of where you are. Study local events, local history. Very important. Also, why I'm a big fan of biographies, because there's so much information in Belva Davis and Individ. Really, every black person, think about writing a biography. What has your experience been on the plantation? You talk about work, talk about parenting, talk about your childhood and how you were parent, your school experience. If that's, K through high school, if that's K through post grad, if that's K through dropped out in middle school, whatever. All of that, and how racism impacted all of that, and events that took place during your lifetime and what you thought about them. Belva Davis does some of that as well, and how they impacted her personally. It doesn't have to be massive, doesn't have to be 1,000 pages, right? Maybe everybody write a biography about white supremacy, racism. Never know who will read it. Might inspire them to solve this problem. Let's see. Notes, finishing our first email. So picking up in chapter 9. White supremacists plan to kidnap the daughter of... we were in chapter 8. Sorry, got too far ahead. It had come out early in December that the FBI had been trying to infiltrate the Nation of Islam as part of the COINTELPRO. I thought they were protected by their constitutional rights. Contradiction? 3. Stallings had big ears like Guilford, who had ears so big, as a kid his mother took to calling him Jughead. Stallings became Little Jughead. Jughead was a white teenage character in the popular Archie comic books sold during the time period. Name calling. Yes, as terms of endearment. We do lots of that. 4. Lawrence took one look at us, reached in his waistband, and started running. Did he run black? Of course he did. All of us do. 5. The girl had a boyfriend who was a lifer in Quentin and a major player in the Black Guerrilla Family, BGF, founded by George Jackson while in prison, author of Soul Dad Brother, The Prison Letters of George Jackson, and Blood in My Eye. 6. The SFPD apparently complying with Judge Peckham's directive, eliminating the height requirement and bringing both female and minority recruits into the academy. However, in February 1974, they reversed themselves on the height requirement. This height requirement seems as if it was directed primarily to enroll more women. I would agree. You're getting rid of it, I would think. Yes, get rid of that. Then we can get some white women. 7. SFPD appealing to African American officers. Obvious incentive was an expectation of personal advancement designed to use the natural desire of all officers for better jobs and plum assignments to divide blacks, undermining the greater good by enticing an ambitious few. Racial showcasing. No one does it better. 8. Standing before the judge, he began with irony, congratulating the SFPD on having accomplished one of the greatest feats in the history of affirmative action, increasing the numbers of Native Americans by over 2,000% in months. Senator Elizabeth Warren syndrome. Told you it's so many of those. It's goofy, man. Rachel Dolezal. 9. Eventually it was proven that some of the tests given to minorities were statistically more difficult than those given to whites. I would love to have more details regarding the particulars of the test, right? That's what I mean, like a footnote, because if that's true, if this came out in court, this should be like transcript. Maybe the local papers covered this, right? Because I said I've got articles, like I would have to go and see, do some of the articles, do they specify, like what was it, like I said, is it square root of pi times the 3 to the 3rd power, and all this whole extra, and they got 1 + 1 is, that's the white test. Come on. Number 10, the weathermen, who now call themselves the Weather Underground. Bill Ayers, guest on the Cows, 2009, had been operating in the Bay Area since 1970 when a bomb planted in the SFPD's Park Street station killed Sergeant Brian McDonnell and injured 8 others. A communique declared it was a product of the Women's Brigade. What? How is that going to stop Mississippi appendectomies? This seems to be a brazen attempt to exploit the pain and victimization of non-white victims. I would agree. Calla, now, they could have just said, hey, we have a lot of forced sterilizations in California, because the two states that did the most forced sterilizations leading up to this time period that was stopped, called attention to in the 70s, Virginia, California. They could have just kept it local, because that was a huge, they had lots of non-white. You don't have to be going all the way to Mississippi and all that. I'm sure they, appreciate, well, maybe. But, hey, you got people right there where you are. You don't have to go look in different time zones. We're going to look out for our non-white sisters right here that's been sterilized without their consent, and we're going to bomb a few things for them. Even though, again, I prefer, can you get us some Brussels sprouts, maybe? I mean, you blowing up stuff. Do I work there now? I don't have a job because y'all blew this up? Like, how is that helping, making things better for me? How is that solving problems for me? White women. You read the anarchist cookbook like Reb and vodka, and now you want to go show off. Is that what this is? Come on. 11. Bernadine Dorn wrote a letter of her own to the Chronicle, taking a very different tone than Rubin. Wife of Cow's guest Bill Ayers. Became a law professor at Northwestern University until 2013 after her terrorist activities. Co-founded the Weather Underground. How many of the so-called black radicals from this era went on to have comfortable lives after their radical ways ended? I suspect not as many as their white comrades. We brought this point up to Bill Ayers. You got people like Mumia Abu-Jamal been in prison for decades, and other black people now. I guess you could say like Bobby Seale. He's been out, doing speaking engagements and such, and he's published books and that sort of thing. Angela Davis, she's been a professor prominently at different institutions and gets to go out and speak and does books and things of that nature. But man, there are lots more black people that I can think of who did far less, didn't bomb anything, didn't blow up anything, and even that's not even an accurate comparison. Angela Davis wasn't going around blowing up things. It's no reason that she shouldn't be able to be, a speaker. It would have to be, name some black people that were out bombing federal facilities, and now they're a distinguished professor and published 2 or 3 books on C-SPAN from time to time. Who is that? Let's see. 12. Just a few days before the strike began, Randolph Hearst, as part of his effort to win the release of his daughter, California Governor Ronald Reagan at the time and future president, referred to this, we learned in the mayor's text. Too bad we can't have an epidemic of botulism. We talked about that. Like, that's, you could die from botulism, these folks. And he talked about when they did that food giveaway, Jim Jones and the People's Temple, they were able to go and loot a lot of the goodies when they would figure out in advance and get their scheme to go and get whatever, so they could go and continue to have the government and others subsidize their terrorist genocidal experiment. 13. Published report recommending that citizens begin a series of anti-terrorism measures, installing home security systems, neighborhood intelligence networks, creating a reactionary precursor to Neighborhood Watch. Unusual means Ahmaud Arbery is in your neighborhood. I presume African-American inventor Mary Van Britten Brown patented the first video-based home security system in 1969. That is the year Fred Hampton, Black Panther Party member, was killed, and Mark Clark, 1 year after the assassination of Dr. King. This also is the same time period when the AR-15s started being promoted, like that whole prepper and white man with a gun, I'm tough, was same time period. Chapter 9. 9 times out of 10, killers like the ones in Zebra are sociopaths, Sanders observes. It may never be proven that the article was a trigger for violence after 9 weeks of inaction by the killers. The first part of the Jennings article appeared in the morning edition of the Chronicle on April 1. When part 2 appeared 24 hours later, it would be eclipsed by a far bigger story. How do the terms sociopath, psychopath apply to non-white victims who collectively may not qualify for mental health? Great point. Might just be, as I said, correctly responding to racism, if that's what this is at all. Or I won't say correctly, but responding to racism. We'll just say it that way. 2. White supremacists plan to kidnap the daughter of Belva Davis, the first black TV newswoman in California and one of the first visible African Americans in the Bay Area. Miss Davis was born in 1932. 3 years after Mr. Fuller. In Monroe, Louisiana, Bill Russell, same area. She migrated to San Francisco with her family at age 8. Bill Russell, too, was not able to attend college due to racism finances. Met with a lot of racism during the course of her year. Her career, she wrote that autobiography, Never in My Wildest Dreams. 3. Same week that Rainwater was killed and Patty joined the SLA, Henry Aaron tied Babe Ruth's record of 714 home runs. A week later, he broke it and did it with people threatening to go to games with high-powered rifles and kill him. Not people, white people. White. See, that's what I said. It can't be. Before he said blacks. Are they people? Are they humans? And then here, we don't even identify what people were terrorizing, hammering Hank Aaron. Who was doing this exact? Oh, white people. And they talked about that explicitly because Mr. Aaron just passed recently during COVID-19, and they got video, of a color video of all of this, and said, "Oh man, the hate and vitriol and naked racism. Oof. That nigga, you aren't even supposed to be out there. I blame Jackie Robinson for all this, and I'll take that bat and ram it up your, all that. All that." Any hoodles. Let me see. I did not get to my notes. I will see if I can get a few of my notes in real quick before we conclude. Let's see. You all touched on a number of things. We got another mention. We heard Reverend Cecil Williams in the audio to begin, and then we hear Reverend Cecil Williams again talking and saying that he agreed to help with the organization to get the food programs and all of that. Now, again, nobody organized to take more advantage of the food than the People's Temple, as I said, but Mr. Williams would pop back up with all the Jonestown mess a few years later. Let's see. Chapter 9, Flashpoints. Guilford learned that a handful... Oh, we got that one. At 19, Thomas Rainwater was a first-year cadet at the Salvation Army School for Officer Training in San Francisco, one of 4 regional training schools run by the Salvation Army. Thomas's dream was to do missionary work and help run an orphanage. Missionary work where? You going to some non-white place, religion of white supremacy, and steal children? Like do an orphan? Like where exactly do you want to set this orphanage up? What type of children? In your vision, like where are you getting these children from? That's what I was thinking. Because all of this, the way that the victims are often described, they're so wholesome and pure and all those pretty white women and all the rest of it, industrious. Even when he talked about Paul Danzig before, he totally minimizes all of his drug. There's a totally different book about the zebra murders written by, I believe, also a white man. This book was published years earlier. They give so much more information about Paul Danzig. That's the guy I said before, like, whoa, this guy was arrested in a drug sting in Hong Kong. Like, what in the world? Like, what kind of drug trafficking is going on here? Maybe this guy wasn't just some zebra target. Maybe this was a drug deal gone bad. They give a lot more detail in that other book about his drug trafficking. He is not some garden variety. I even talked about that. He was described as a basic garden variety junkie. No, man. How many, as I said, basic junkies make trips to Hong Kong? Pounds of cannabis and a hashish pipe. Come on. Let's see. Anything else? Oh my, I wigged out. I was so glad I knew the address when he said it had been raining all day. There was a slight break in the showers as the young couple left the training school at Laguna and started up Geary in search of a late night snack at a supermarket on Webster just a few block below Fillmore and Temple number 26. I told you last week. Geary Boulevard, 1859 Geary Boulevard. That is the People's Temple address at this time. How in the world is all of this happening right there? And it's not just This book, People's Temple, is not mentioned. Jim Jones is not mentioned. The other book, People's Temple, not mentioned. Jim Jones is not mentioned. How is that? They're operating here at this time. How is that? The temple is right there. How is that? How are they not out protesting all of this? Why aren't they talking about it more? I don't understand. Let's see. When he talks all this, the same thing that's sparked the killing was getting in the way of solving it. As hateful as the killers were, it was racism that lit the fire that burned inside them, and it was racism that kept the department so white we didn't have enough black officers to infiltrate a group like the one we're after. I don't know if that's, in terms of the infiltration, because I've said before, I think these black groups are pretty well infiltrated, but whatever. I get the logic in terms of, the racism is keeping us from having adequate officers to cover all of our needs to keep citizens safe. I get that to a degree, but again, that's why Mr. Fuller says police is not the correct term, because they don't have correct intentions. These are enforcement officers, primarily race soldiers, to enforce the law's legal arm of white supremacy. That's what we're talking about. But yeah, I thought that was, let's see. And indefinitely classed on Zebra Patrol. Now again, you got all these murders. They said they had the murders happening. The report that I read, that the S&M murders that are happening, the Zodiac killings that are taking place. You got all this criminal activity. They're going to kidnap Belva Davis's daughter, but we're going to stop black dudes. Come on. Didn't do that for Jeff Dahmer either. You can think of all the white serial killers that we've had over the years. When did they do that? Like I said, listeners pointed out when we read the 22 caliber killing, it wasn't even about stopping white dudes. How about just let us know, hey, they're killing black dudes, get off the street. They didn't even do that. Much less all the mocking and cheering and celebrating of the killings of black dudes in Buffalo. We shall resume next week. We'll get more on these zebra hunts, Operation Zebra as it's called, next week as we boogie towards the conclusion of the text. Mae Brussel had a lot more to say about this case as it got later in the year. She was off the air at the beginning of 1974 and then came back in March. So I guess as she kind of got settled and what have you, she had quite a bit to say about this case as we kind of proceed. So we'll be kind of synced up in the book. We're in April of 74 now, so we'll be able to move forward. We started with a little bit of April 74 today, and then we'll have more April and May of 74 for next week. Whole movie on this as well called Zebra Murders. It has like 3 alternate titles, but if you want to check it, matter of fact, the movie is so, I don't even know what to say. The movie, the killer, it's one person is doing the killings, but the killer is a white man in blackface with an afro wig. It's called Zebra Murders. It was released in 1974, like the same year as these killings. There's normally like a little space. They wait a year. 74. I think this movie came out before anyone had even been prosecuted for these crimes. White man in blackface is the zebra killer. Which, anyway, we'll be back next week. Feel free. Take notes. We have folks in California. Let us know what you think about all of this. Are black people angry? That was said in the book. Are black people angry? And how is that anger demonstrated? Let us know. We'll be here tomorrow, neutralizing workplace racism, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Sobriety would be best. Drugs is such a massive part of this entire time period, and maybe California in general. We need high-functioning brain computers to solve our problem. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. we ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. No name call. We've had so much name calling in this book. Black people name calling other black people, and white people name calling black people, and all the rest are like, hey, no name calling black people. No gossiping. We got a good amount of that in this book too. No throwaway offspring. That way we don't need the orphanage. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. Yeah. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.